My name's Nathan, I'm 29, and until recently, I thought I had a pretty good handle on boundaries. I was the first in my family to buy a house, small, two-bedroom place tucked on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy. It was modest, comfortable, mine. After years of working IT support during the day and freelance tech gigs at night, I finally had enough for the down payment. My place was supposed to be a fresh start. And for the first couple months, it was. That changed the day my sister showed up on the porch with a suitcase and mascara-streaked cheeks. Jenna, 25, had just broken up with her on-again, off-again boyfriend for the third time this year. She didn't ask to stay, just cried, hugged me, and walked right in like she still lived with me, like it was still 2013 and we were teenagers sharing a bathroom. I didn't protest. Family is family, right? 3 days later, my parents showed up. Not for a visit. No, they brought Tupperware containers, lawn chairs, and my dad's old recliner. My mom kissed my cheek like she was doing me a favor and said, "We just need to crash here while they finish spraying for mold in the guest room." I remember blinking at her and stammering, "What guest room?" And she laughed, tossed her bag on my couch, and said, "Yours now, I guess." That was the beginning of the end, though I didn't realize it then. At first, I tried to be patient. I figured it would be a week, 2 tops. But a week became 2, then a month. Jenna couldn't afford rent. Mom said they were still waiting on repairs. Every time I brought it up, the conversation got derailed with guilt. "Nathan, you know your dad's back pain flares up at night?" Or, "You think it's easy for Jenna to be alone right now?" I'd nod, retreat to my room, and tell myself to wait it out. But it was never waiting it out. It was them settling in. The first time I saw Jenna walk out of my room with wet hair and my towel slung over her shoulder, I paused mid-sip of coffee. Did you use my shower?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She didn't even turn around. "You've got the better water pressure. And your room's bigger." That was how I found out I'd been unofficially demoted to the guest room. When I protested, my mom blinked at me and said, "Nathan, she's going through a hard time. Don't be selfish." I remember swallowing that word like a pill too big to digest. Selfish. It wasn't just the bedroom. It was everything. I started coming home to find my groceries half-eaten, my tools scattered in the yard, and my dad watching cable on my account while barking at me to keep it down if I was on a late Zoom call. One night, I opened the fridge and realized the steak I'd been marinating for days was gone, replaced with a sticky note that read, "Didn't think you'd mind." They never offered to chip in. Ever. But the bills kept rising. The AC ran all day. Jenna took hour-long showers. Mom insisted on fresh produce daily. I was shelling out over $1,100 a month in utilities and food on top of the mortgage. I kept a spreadsheet out of frustration, not spite. I wanted to prove to myself I wasn't being dramatic. By month 4, the quiet I once treasured was gone. My dad started hosting poker nights in my living room, complete with smoke, beer bottles, and loud laughter that bled through the walls. One night I stepped out and asked, politely, if they could wrap up soon since I had an early morning shift. My dad laughed, slapped a card on the table, and said, "If you're so unhappy, why don't you move out?" I just stood there. That line. It sat in my chest like a rock. My name was on the deed. I paid every cent. I let them in. I didn't respond. Not then. That night, I stayed up. Not watching TV. Not scrolling my phone. I just sat in the dim glow of the kitchen light, listening to Jenna giggling on the phone, my dad's laugh echoing through the vents, my mom humming while rearranging my spice rack. And all I could think about was that word again. Selfish. Selfish for asking for space. Selfish for wanting a clean kitchen. Selfish for needing quiet. It didn't add up. And yet, they'd made me feel like the outsider in my own home. So I tested something. The following week, I took a Friday off work. I told no one. Instead, I left the house at sunrise and spent the day driving up the coast, sitting at a beach cafe, watching the waves crash. No texts. No updates. Just silence. When I came back that evening, no one had even noticed I was gone. But the living room was a mess. My dad's friends were back. And someone, Jenna, had left a pile of laundry on my desk chair. So I asked. I waited for a quiet moment and asked them, with all the patience I could fake, would it be possible for me to have just 1 week? Alone? Just one. My mom scoffed before I could finish the sentence. "Nathan, you're being dramatic. You act like this isn't your family." Jenna chimed in from the hallway, "Why are you so weird about space?" And my dad, he didn't even look up from the TV. "If you're so miserable, pack a bag." I nodded. And I did. That night, I packed in silence. Just a duffel bag. Essentials. Laptop, birth certificate, passport, a few clothes. I even remembered the spare house key under the back porch, one they didn't know about. I sat in my car for a long time after locking the door. Not angry. Just clear. The next morning, I signed a transfer. I'd already looked into it weeks ago, just in case. I wasn't selling. I was placing the house in a trust under my name with restricted access. And I hired locksmiths. Paid extra for emergency service. They arrived just after 6 a.m. And as the first lock clicked into place, I checked my phone. 6 missed calls. 3 voicemails. 1 text from Jenna. Where are you? The key isn't working. I just stared at the screen as the locksmith handed me the new set. Then, I slid the keys into my pocket, thanked the locksmiths, and walked away without turning back. I had booked myself a 2-week stay at a quiet Airbnb not far from the ocean, minimalist space, white walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, and more silence than I'd had in months. For the first hour, I didn't even unpack. I just laid on the bed, staring at the ceiling, letting the absence of chaos settle into my bones. It wasn't peace yet, but it was the closest I'd felt to it in a long, long time. Around noon, my phone started buzzing again. Jenna texted, "Did you seriously change the locks?" Dad texted, "Call me. Now." Mom texted, "Nathan, this isn't funny." I silenced the phone and turned it face down. By 3 p.m., they escalated. The group chat lit up. Dad texted, "Where's the key?" Jenna texted, "You need to stop acting like this house is your private castle." Mom texted, "We're family." Nathan, families don't do this to each other. Families also don't hijack your life and gaslight you into silence. But I didn't text that. I didn't text anything. For once, I decided to let their panic live in the vacuum where my answers used to be. Because that was the only thing I'd been too afraid to do, let them sit with themselves. It was nearly dusk when my phone rang again. This time, a different tone. My mom's name lit up the screen, but I could already tell from the flurry of shorter texts that came before that her frustration was now teetering on something else. Fear, maybe. Inconvenience, at the very least. Mom texted, "Where are you? We can talk." "You're being cruel." I took a breath, then typed 3 words. I needed space. No explanation. No apology. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then, "Nathan, we're locked out. We can't get inside." I didn't reply. I just stared out the window as the sun dipped behind the water, painting the sky in orange and lavender. It was beautiful. Quiet. Mine. The next morning, I had 6 new voicemails. The first was from my dad, trying to sound calm but failing. "Son, this is ridiculous. We've got groceries in the trunk. You're acting like a child. You made your point, all right? Now open the door." The second was from Jenna, sulky and sarcastic. "Wow, real mature. What, you want us to beg? This is pathetic." Third, my mom. Gentle. Like honey-coated barbed wire. "Sweetheart, I'm sorry if we made you feel unwelcome in your own home. That was never our intention. But locking us out? This is going too far." They still didn't get it. Because none of them had ever treated it like my home until now. By noon, I got a message from my neighbor, Mr. McCaffrey, a retired vet who always waved when I mowed the lawn. "McCaffrey, hey kid. Your folks are sitting on your porch with folding chairs. You okay?" I texted him back. "I'm good. House is fine. Just making some changes." He didn't reply, but he didn't need to. I knew he'd keep an eye on things. He always did. Around 3 p.m., my mom sent the longest message yet. It started with how worried they were, shifted to how this wasn't like me, and eventually arrived at the real concern. Where are we supposed to sleep? I stared at it for a long time. That single line broke something open in me. Not anger, not guilt. Clarity. Because for 4 months, I hadn't been sleeping well. I tiptoed through my own house. I'd watch my groceries disappear, my bills climb, my peace disintegrate. I'd let them chip away at me until I became a version of myself I barely recognized, tired, tense, resigned. And now, for the first time, they were uncomfortable. They didn't know where they belonged. They didn't know how to fix it. And they had to sit with that. Just like I did. For months. I let the message sit. I turned off notifications. I cooked dinner, just for me, for the first time in what felt like years. I even laughed a little when I realized I could finally use the kitchen without someone hovering, asking if I bought oat milk or almond, or if I'd seen their leftover sushi. The Airbnb had a small deck with a view of the ocean. I sat there, warm drink in hand, phone dark beside me, and realized something else. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. Done being the safety net. Done being the backup plan. Done being told that wanting peace made me selfish. The next morning, I called my lawyer. We talked through the trust, the terms, the eviction process. Because yes, despite the screaming voicemails that followed, I knew my rights. They weren't tenants. They weren't on the deed. They were guests. Unwanted ones. And if they wouldn't leave with grace, then they'd leave with notice. When I hung up, I saw another new message. This one from Jenna. You're seriously doing this? After everything we've done for you? I blinked at the audacity. After everything they'd done for me? I opened the spreadsheet I'd been keeping. For months. $13,028.49. Groceries. Utilities. Repairs. All mine. Every cent. I took a screenshot. Attached it to a message. This is everything I've done for you. I hit send. 10 minutes later, she blocked me. And as I sat there, breathing in salt air, I knew. They still didn't get it. But soon, they would. The silence that followed Jenna's block was almost louder than the chaos that had come before it. No one else texted that night. Not my mom, not my dad. No half-hearted apologies, no manipulative guilt trips, no passive-aggressive emojis. Just silence. And for the first time in months, I didn't dread checking my phone. I didn't brace for impact every time a notification popped up. I even slept through the night, no earplugs, no anxiety about what drama I'd wake up to. But peace never lasts long when your family treats boundaries like invitations. 2 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to it while making eggs and toast. Hello, this is Officer Ramirez with the local police department. We've had a welfare check request for a Nathan H. You're not in any trouble, but if you could give us a call back to confirm you're safe, and well, we'd appreciate it. I nearly dropped the spatula. They reported me missing. I called the officer back immediately, trying to keep my voice steady. He was polite, professional, and, thankfully, understanding. I told him I was fine, not missing, and just taking a break from a toxic situation involving my family. He chuckled softly and said, "You'd be surprised how often that happens." By the time we hung up, the anger that had started to fade came roaring back. They knew where I was. They knew. I'd never even left the state. My car was registered to the address. My work hadn't reported anything unusual. They just wanted to stir up fear, to paint me as unstable or irrational. The missing person report wasn't about concern, it was about control. Later that evening, I checked the security cameras I'd installed months ago, the ones nobody else knew about. I hadn't looked at them in weeks, but curiosity got the best of me. There they were, all 3 of them, sitting on my porch like squatters. Jenna scrolling her phone furiously. My mom pacing, animatedly talking on her cell. My dad slouched in the folding chair, rubbing his temples, muttering something I couldn't hear. At one point, my mom walked up to the front door and tried the knob again. When it didn't budge, she pressed her face to the window, peering inside like a stranger. Then, she turned to Jenna and said something that made her daughter throw up her hands and yell. I zoomed in slightly and hit record, just in case. They were unraveling. Slowly. Publicly. I let the video play while I sent one final email to my lawyer, asking her to move forward with the formal eviction notice, hand-delivered, with police presence if needed. It wasn't the route I wanted to take, but they'd made it clear they didn't believe I'd follow through. They needed a message. And this time, they'd get it. By day 5 of my absence, my neighbor McCaffrey called again. "Hey, just so you know," he said, voice low like he didn't want to be overheard. "They brought a moving truck. Parked it in front like they're loading up, but they haven't packed anything. They just keep pacing in and out. Your mom keeps saying you'll come around." I sighed and rubbed my eyes. "Thanks for the heads up. They won't be there much longer." He chuckled. "They're lucky you're handling this with grace. If it were my kid pulling that stunt in my house?" Phew. I smiled, just a little. "Yeah, well, I'm not a kid anymore." I ended the call, then pulled up my saved drafts and sent the message I'd been waiting to send. To Jenna, Mom, Dad. Subject, formal notice. Effective immediately, you are no longer permitted to remain on the property at my address. This is a legal notice. You are not tenants, you are guests. You overstayed your welcome, caused significant financial burden, and refused multiple verbal requests for space. A legal eviction notice will be served within 48 hours. Law enforcement will be present if necessary. Any further attempts to contact me for anything other than legal correspondence will be considered harassment. Nathan, I didn't sign it. Love, Nathan. I didn't ask them to understand. I didn't offer a ride or a final meal or one last heart-to-heart. I just sent it and immediately blocked all three of them. 24 hours later, I received a single voicemail from my mom's number before the block kicked in. I couldn't listen to the audio directly, but I saw the transcript from the preview. You ungrateful little, after everything how dare you? This is not how families treat each other. That was all I needed to see. 2 hours later, McCaffrey texted me again. They're gone. Truck's packed. Porch is clear. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked outside my Airbnb and stood barefoot in the grass, watching the wind push through the trees like they were exhaling on my behalf. The quiet wasn't just around me anymore. It was in me. But I knew the storm wasn't fully over. Not yet. The final piece didn't fall into place until about 2 weeks later. By then, I'd already moved back into my house, not out of some triumphant return, but out of necessity. The Airbnb was peaceful, sure, but it wasn't home. And after everything I'd been through, I wanted my space back. The way I intended it. Clean. Quiet. Mine. When I pulled into the driveway that morning, it felt like walking into a crime scene that had already been cleaned up. Everything was technically fine, but the atmosphere still carried the faint echo of the invasion. My front porch still had a faint smudge on the glass where Mom had pressed her face to peek in. The grass was overgrown. The recycling bin was stuffed with fast food containers, trash they hadn't even bothered to take with them when they left. A parting gift, I guess. Inside, the house smelled like stale coffee, lavender air freshener, and something oddly metallic I couldn't place. I spent hours scrubbing every surface. Washed all the linens. Hauled 3 bags of forgotten junk to the curb. By the end of the day, my body ached, but the house finally felt like mine again. A blank slate. And then, right as I was sitting down to eat dinner, my first real meal in that kitchen since February, my phone buzzed with a notification from the local courthouse. Eviction order. Status closed. Defendants vacated property voluntarily. No court appearance required. That was it. No drama. No legal battle. Just a digital receipt confirming that the storm had passed. Or so I thought. 3 days later, I received a thick, cream-colored envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a folded letter. My name on top. No greeting. Just my mom's handwriting. Nathan, I hope you're proud of what you've done. You've humiliated your family, broken our trust, and treated us like criminals for simply needing help. We don't understand how you could turn so cold. Your father is devastated. Jenna hasn't left her room in days. Do you even care? All we ever wanted was to be close to you. But clearly, you've made your choice. I hope your silence is worth it. I hope your empty house keeps you warm at night. We raised you better than this. I just didn't realize how much you resented us until now. Don't bother replying. We'll give you your space. There was no signature. No love, Mom. Just folded bitterness on cream paper. I read it once. Then again. Then laughed, not the bitter, sarcastic kind of laugh, but something soft. Almost pitying. Because they still didn't get it. I hadn't locked them out because I hated them. I hadn't pushed them away because I resented them. I did it because I finally understood what boundaries meant. I did it because after months, years, really, of bending until I broke, I realized the only person who would protect my peace was me. I placed the letter in a drawer. Not to revisit. Just to remember. That week, I took time off work. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't make an announcement or post anything online. I just lived. I cleaned. I read books I hadn't touched in years. I spent quiet evenings with candles and music and no interruptions. I called old friends and reconnected. I slept. Really slept. And somewhere in the middle of that stillness, something inside me healed. Not overnight. Not with fireworks. But in the small, ordinary moments of solitude that I had once been afraid to claim. I didn't hear from my family for a while. No more letters. No more voicemails. A blessed, intentional silence. I later found out through a mutual cousin that Jenna had moved in with an old college friend. My parents, apparently, were back in their house and adjusting. Good. Let them adjust. Let them sit with the consequences they never thought would come. Months passed. Fall came. The leaves changed, and with them, so did I. I began to feel less like a wounded animal and more like a man in control of his life. I planted new flowers in the yard. Bought a used couch that didn't smell like cigar smoke. Even started sketching again, something I hadn't done since high school. Then, in late October, just before my 30th birthday, I got another envelope. This time with a return address. My parents. I stared at it for a long time. Considered throwing it away unopened. But curiosity won. It wasn't a letter this time. Just a card. Front, happy 30th birthday, son. Inside, we hope you're doing well. We miss you. If you're open to talking, we'd like to come by. Just to talk. No pressure. Love, Mom and Dad, no guilt. No manipulation. Just an olive branch. I set the card down on the kitchen counter and stared at it. I didn't call. I didn't write back. I didn't say no, either. Instead, I took a long walk. I thought about the person I was at the start of the year, the one who bent every time someone asked, who swallowed his frustration, who called sacrifice love and silence respect. And I thought about the person I'd become, someone who knew his worth, someone who earned his peace, someone who wasn't afraid to walk away, even from family. When I got back home, I lit a candle, poured myself a drink, and sat on the couch in my clean, quiet house. Alone, but not lonely. And I realized something. This wasn't revenge. This was recovery. And I wasn't going back. Not for anyone. Not ever again. My name is Elias. I'm 31, single, and by most definitions, well off. I work in fintech, specifically systems integration for regional banks. So no, it's not flashy, but it pays more than enough to fund the lifestyle I always dreamed of as a broke teenager in a house where the thermostat stayed at 60 in winter because we're not made of money. I moved out at 19, got a partial scholarship, 2 part-time jobs, and a studio apartment with a leaky sink and paper-thin walls. My parents were proud until they realized I wasn't sending money home. That changed once I landed my first real job at 23. My mom called crying about a past-due medical bill. I paid it. My dad followed up a month later with a story about the car needing brakes. I covered that too. Then came the mortgage, the credit cards, my sister's community college tuition, which mysteriously dropped out of the family budget and fell on me when she threatened to quit. Before I knew it, I was the family wallet. Quiet, reliable, out of sight, but never out of reach. At first, it felt like love, like I was finally being accepted on their terms. But eventually, the calls stopped being requests. They became expectations. If I was a day late sending money, I'd get guilt-tripped by Mom. Your father's blood pressure spikes every time a bill comes in. Do you want that on your conscience? Or passive-aggressive texts from Dad like, guess we'll just sell the fridge and live off ice. Meanwhile, my brother Micah, 2 years younger, still living at home, floated between warehouse jobs and startup ideas that never went anywhere. He was the creative one, the one with real passion, according to our parents. Never mind the fact that he hadn't contributed a single cent to the household in 5 years. He helped carrying groceries, so apparently, that balanced the scales. Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I saw them twice a year, Thanksgiving and Christmas. Every other interaction was digital. I kept the peace by wiring the money, answering the calls, and sending gifts labeled from all of us, even though Micah never chipped in a dime. I didn't do it because I wanted gratitude. I did it because some naive part of me thought I was investing in a version of family I never really had growing up, one where we didn't keep score. That illusion shattered last Christmas. It started with a text from Mom 2 weeks out. Don't overthink your gift. We just want your presents. Bring that apple pie you made last year. No problem. I booked the flight, scheduled the rental, and wrapped a custom-engraved watch I bought for myself back in November, a reminder to take time for myself after a brutally long product launch. I hadn't worn it yet. Thought I'd wait until New Year's. The moment I walked into the house, I knew something was off. The decorations were extra, like they were trying to impress someone. Lights in every window, a fresh coat of paint on the porch, and that fake snow stuff sprayed on the bushes, even though we lived in Georgia. Inside, the house was packed. My cousin Ava, who I hadn't seen in years. Uncle Don and his third wife. Even Aunt Thelma, who hadn't spoken to Dad since the casserole war of 2012. I didn't mind the crowd. What bothered me was the whispering. The way everyone looked at me like I was the UPS guy delivering turkey instead of family. And Micah? He didn't even get up from the couch when I walked in. Just raised a can of Sprite like he was toasting a bet he'd just won. Look who decided to show up, he said with a grin. Long flight, I muttered, setting the pie on the counter. Dinner came and went in a blur of small talk and lukewarm mashed potatoes. I was mostly quiet, half listening while Dad complained about woke car commercials and Mom bragged about Micah's latest podcast, which, by the way, had 4 episodes and no listeners. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, passed the gravy, and tried to feel like I belonged. Then came the toast. My dad stood up, cleared his throat dramatically like he was announcing the end of a war, and raised his glass. "To the son who actually shows up," he said, his eyes fixed on Micah. "Not the one who just sends money." The room erupted into polite laughter. Even Mom chuckled behind her wine glass. Micah smirked and leaned back in his chair like he'd just won a gold medal in emotional gymnastics. I blinked. My face got hot, not from embarrassment, but from clarity. Because in that moment, it hit me. They didn't just take me for granted, they resented me. My brother, who once totaled his car and used my credit to lease a new one, was their golden child. The one who actually showed up. I was the ATM, the backup plan, the guy who paid for Christmas dinner but wasn't invited to carve the turkey. And the watch? That was the final straw. After dinner, I caught Micah in the living room, casually unwrapping a gift box that looked painfully familiar. The custom watch, the one I'd bought for myself. I stood there, frozen, as he slid it onto his wrist. "Dude," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where'd you get that?" He shrugged. "It was under the tree. Said it was from you." "It was mine," I replied slowly. He just laughed. "Well, thanks, man. Always wanted one of these." I walked upstairs without another word. My old bedroom had been turned into a laundry room. No joke, there was a stacked washer-dryer where my desk used to be. I sat on the bed, a cot, actually, and stared at the ceiling for a long time, hearing their voices echo through the floorboards. Laughter, music, clinking glasses. Not one person had said thank you. Not one person had asked how I was. They didn't care that I'd covered the rent last month or paid off the credit card bill that covered their flights to Orlando. They cared that I didn't come to brunch, that I didn't like football, that I didn't show up. That night, I waited until everyone was asleep, pulled out my laptop, logged into the accounts I'd set up years ago to make their lives easier, and reviewed every connection. The mortgage? In my name. The utilities? All me. The family Netflix account? Guess who? I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I started typing. By 3 a.m., the house was mine again. Autopays, canceled. Credit cards, deactivated. Scheduled transfers, paused indefinitely. I even set up a few email alerts, just for fun. But the real cherry on top? A message. Scheduled to drop into the family group chat at 8 a.m. sharp. 5 words. "Merry Christmas, you're all past due." And just as I was about to hit save, my phone buzzed. It was Micah. "Hey," he texted. "Where'd you go?" People are asking. I didn't answer, because I was already planning what came next. I didn't sleep. Not even a little. I sat on that narrow cot with my back against the wall, watching the minutes tick by on my phone like I was defusing a bomb, or maybe lighting one. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, not because I doubted myself, but because I needed to feel it. Every second, every quiet click that signaled the end of an era I should have walked away from years ago. Micah never followed up after his first text. Typical. He probably wandered back to the party, flaunting my watch like a prize from a vending machine, completely unaware that the foundation of his cozy little world was already cracking. Downstairs, someone put on Mariah Carey, too loud, slightly off-key. I closed my laptop, stood up, and looked around the makeshift guest room one last time. The laundry detergent stacked where my books used to be. A random beach towel thrown over a broken chair in the corner. The suitcase I brought was still zipped, unopened. Like even it knew I wouldn't be staying long. I crept down the stairs, careful not to wake the dog. Yes, they had a new golden retriever now, another surprise I learned about from a cousin's Instagram post. I grabbed my coat, slipped out the front door, and drove to the hotel I'd secretly booked earlier that evening, one with an actual bed and working heat. On the way there, I passed a billboard advertising some tacky holiday attraction. "Christmas is what you make it," I scoffed out loud. Not this year. At 7:59 a.m. the next morning, I was already sitting at a corner booth in a quiet cafe near the airport, sipping bad coffee and watching the sun rise over a frozen parking lot. I had my laptop open, not for work, just to watch. I refreshed the group chat. 8 o'clock. Nothing. 8:01. And then it hit. "Mom, Elias? What does this mean?" "Micah, dude. Did you just cancel the Wi-Fi?" "Dad, call me now. This isn't funny." "Mom again. Why isn't the mortgage showing up?" "The app says it's inactive." My phone started ringing immediately. First Mom, then Dad, then Micah, of all people. I didn't answer, just muted the notifications and watched as more texts poured in, each one more frantic than the last. Dad, I just got off the phone with the bank. What did you do? Micah, you're being really dramatic, bro. We can talk. Talk. Now they wanted to talk. I scrolled past the messages and stared at my own final text. Just 5 words. But they hit like a gavel. Merry Christmas, you're all past due. I hadn't realized how much weight I'd been carrying until that moment. It wasn't just the money. It was the constant expectation to prove myself. To buy my place in a family that only remembered I existed when the bills came due. Every year, I thought, maybe this time it'll be different. Maybe they'll see me. Maybe they'll say thank you. Maybe I won't be the invisible support beam holding everything together from hundreds of miles away. But no, I wasn't their son. I was their subscription service. And the free trial just ended. Still, I didn't block them. Not yet. I wanted to give them a chance, just one, to respond like human beings. Not clients, not leeches, but actual people who understood what they'd done. I waited all day, kept my phone on silent, but checked the notifications every hour. Most were variations of panic and rage. Mom, you're overreacting. We never asked you to pay for everything. Dad, if you wanted recognition, you should have said something. This is just petty. Micah, wow. Way to ruin Christmas. But one message stood out. It came in late that evening, right as I was packing to leave the hotel. Mom, Elias, you've always been so distant. We thought you preferred it that way. We didn't know you felt like this. That gave me pause. Not because it was an apology, it wasn't. It was a deflection, a way to twist the blame into something passive, something my fault for not being more emotionally available while I was paying off their second mortgage. I read it twice. Then I closed the phone and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I didn't reply. Instead, I headed to the airport early. I had a one-way ticket home, my real home, 2 states over. A place with silence, hardwood floors, and 0 family photos on the walls. Just the way I liked it. On the flight, I looked out the window and wondered how long it would take them to realize that the silence wasn't temporary. Because this time, I wasn't coming back to fix it. I wasn't going to restore the auto payments or talk things out. I'd tried that. Too many times. I'd hoped they'd change. That they'd grow into the people I kept pretending they were. But sometimes, family doesn't grow. Sometimes, they rot in place and expect you to keep watering the dead plant just because it's related to you. So I stopped. But the real storm hadn't hit yet. Because what I did after that, that was the part they never saw coming. When I landed, I ignored the dozen voicemails clogging up my inbox. One was just Mom sobbing. Another was Dad shouting about legal consequences like he hadn't been coasting on my credit score for 6 years. Micah left the last one. His tone had shifted from smug to stunned. Bro, just call me, okay? I don't get why you're doing this. I thought we were good. Good? The last time we had a real conversation, he called me a corporate sellout for wearing a blazer to brunch. Now suddenly we were brothers again because the lights flickered and he couldn't watch his YouTube channel on the family Wi-Fi. I shut off my phone completely. The next 3 days were pure silence, and I loved every second of it. I went for long walks. I made real coffee, none of that bitter machine-brewed junk. I read the book that had been sitting on my shelf for months, and I actually slept. Deeply. The kind of sleep you don't get when you're living a double life. Provider on the outside, forgotten on the inside. But on day 4, I checked the mail. It was the mortgage statement. Final one under their name. See, when I bought the house for them years ago, I never transferred the deed. I told myself I'd get to it, that it was just paperwork. But deep down, I think I knew. Knew there'd be a day I'd need an escape hatch. And now I had one. The moment I canceled the auto payments, the bank reverted everything to default settings. That meant the paper trail came back to me. The debt, the equity, and the ownership. Officially, that house was still mine, and I was tired of pretending otherwise. So I drove to the nearest notary, filed a quitclaim deed naming myself the sole occupant, and overnight a certified letter to the house, one addressed to my parents, with a copy of the new deed inside. I didn't include a note. I didn't need to. The envelope spoke for itself. A day later, my phone lit up again. I didn't answer. I just stared at the incoming call. Mom, then Dad, then Micah. Again and again. I let it ring. But that night, curiosity got the better of me. I turned my phone on, just for 5 minutes, and opened the family group chat. Over 40 messages. Dad, You cannot do this. You cannot just take the house. Mom, this is beyond cruel. We thought you were better than this. Micah, are you seriously kicking your own parents out? What is wrong with you? Then, buried in the chaos, one message that made me stop scrolling. A voice memo from my sister, Grace. She rarely got involved. She was the middle child, for years younger than me, and moved to Oregon the second she turned 18. We'd talked a few times over the years, birthdays, holidays, but she always kept her distance. Said the family was too much. Said she was trying to break the cycle. Her voice message was only 30 seconds long. Hey, I know this is probably insane from your end, but I saw the texts. I saw the way they talk about you when you're not around. I just want you to know, I get it. I've been watching them drain you dry for years while pretending Micah walks on water. You're not crazy. You're just done. And I think you should be. I played it twice. Then again. Her voice was calm, unshaken. She wasn't siding with me. She was acknowledging me, which, honestly, was more than I could say about the rest of them. That night, I called her. We talked for 3 hours. Not about the house or the fallout, just about life. Her job, my job. Our mutual hatred of pumpkin spice. Somewhere around midnight, she said, "They're gonna come after you harder now. Emotionally. Legally, maybe. Just be ready." I was. Because I still hadn't dropped the final hammer. See, there was one thing they didn't know. One last card they didn't realize I held. It wasn't money. It wasn't legal power. It was something more explosive. It was the trust fund. Back when I started making real money, I opened a family trust. One of those tax-efficient estate things with lots of fine print and legal jargon. I set it up to protect the assets I didn't need in the short term. Investment properties, a few market accounts, and yes, the house. All of it funneled through a single entity with my name on the title and my signature on the rules. And one of those rules, any dependent receiving financial assistance could be removed at my discretion. And I had receipts. So many receipts. Thousands of dollars in rent, tuition, groceries, phone bills, medical copays, all transferred from me to them over the course of 8 years. I kept it all. Every Venmo screenshot, every wire receipt, every single cent. Because I knew one day I'd need to prove that helping them wasn't an accident. It was a gift, and gifts can stop. I drafted the letter that night. Not angry, not cruel, just clear. I attached a printout of every transaction, a copy of the trust bylaws, and a closing statement. You taught me that family shows up. This is me showing up for myself. Effective immediately, your access is revoked. Do not contact me for money again. I hadn't sent it yet, but I knew exactly when I would. Christmas was over, but New Year's? That's when the real fireworks would begin. New Year's Eve rolled in like fog over the runway. Slow, heavy, inevitable. I spent the last week of December living in a kind of surreal quiet, as if the volume on the entire world had been turned down just for me. No texts from family, finally. They'd stopped sometime around December 29th. Not because they understood, because they were regrouping. I knew them too well. If the initial storm didn't work, anger, guilt, panic, then they'd come back with something even worse, silence. The kind that pretends to be peace, but is actually just war in waiting. I didn't celebrate that night. No party, no champagne, no countdown. Just me, my desk, and a manila envelope already addressed to my parents. Inside was everything. The official removal documents from the trust, copies of all the financial transactions I'd made on their behalf since I was 23, and a notarized declaration revoking their claim to any of my assets, property, or accounts. At the bottom was one final page, clean, simple, brutally direct. As of January 1st, 2025, you are no longer entitled to any financial assistance, property, or access to my resources in any form. This decision is final, legally binding, and irreversible. Please do not contact me unless through legal representation. Elias. I dropped it in the mail first thing on New Year's morning, just as the sky began to lighten. No fanfare, no last-minute hesitation. Just a breath, a step, and the sharp cold air of a clean slate. 3 days passed before I heard from them again. It started with Micah. He emailed me. He never emails me. Under the subject line, "Please read." The body of the message was long, jumbled, obviously written in one emotional burst. He said things like, "You didn't have to go nuclear," and "You know mom's been crying every day," and my personal favorite, I didn't ask for any of that stuff anyway. No apology. No real ownership. Just a desperate flailing at the wreckage. He ended it with, I don't even care about the money. Just don't destroy the family. I didn't reply. Because what family? A few hours later, Dad left a voicemail. His voice was low, calm, even a little choked up. He was trying to sound like the reasonable patriarch. The same tone he used when he talked his way out of a traffic ticket or convinced a bank manager to waive overdraft fees. Elias, I think you've made your point. Loud and clear. We're willing to talk. In person. No more yelling, no blaming. Let's just be civil. Clever phrasing. You've made your point. As if this was all a tantrum. As if what I'd done was performative, instead of the final result of 8 years of buried resentment and one very deliberate unraveling. I turned off my phone again. But then came the letter. Real ink, real signature, real desperation. This time from Mom. She wrote 3 pages. Front and back. No punctuation. Just one long emotional purge of everything she thought might sway me. Old memories, baby stories, how I used to love Christmas, and how proud we are of the man you became, even if we don't say it enough. She didn't mention the toast, or the watch, or the years I paid to keep them comfortable while they barely acknowledged my existence. She ended it with, we're your family. We love you. Families forgive. And there it was again. That word, forgive. The weapon they always reached for last. Not when they were sorry, but when I refused to forget. So I sent one final reply. Just one. Forgiveness is earned, not extracted. You had 8 years of mine. I'm using the next 8 for myself. Then I blocked them all. I changed my number. I closed the shared Netflix account. I even called the storage unit place and removed their access code. Every digital tether was severed, one by one, like I was dismantling a bomb I'd been wearing like jewelry. And it felt free, not bitter, not triumphant, just light. But the story doesn't end with silence. Because 6 months later, something happened I didn't expect. I got a letter from Grace. I hadn't heard from her since New Year's. Not because we were distant, but because, unlike the rest of the family, Grace understood boundaries. She knew I needed time, and she gave it freely. Her letter was short. 1 page. Typed. Neat. Simple. Hey Eli, just wanted you to know that I moved Mom and Dad into a small apartment outside Athens. They lost the house, obviously. Micah tried to cover rent for 2 months, then gave up. Dad's pride is too big for him to get a job, but Mom started working part-time at a fabric store. I visit once a month, but I don't bring the kids. It's not guilt. It's just observation. They still talk about you like you're the villain, like you burned the bridge. But I tell them every time, no, he just stopped letting you walk across him. Proud of you. Really. Grace. I sat there for a long time after reading it. Not because I felt sorry for them. I didn't. Not even close. But because for the first time in my life, someone in that family saw me clearly. And that was worth more than every Christmas gift, every rent payment, every forced phone call I'd ever made. I still live alone. I still work in fintech. But now, I use my money differently. I set up a scholarship fund under a pseudonym, one that specifically supports students with no family financial support. I've mentored 2 young professionals who remind me way too much of myself at 23. And this year, I spent Christmas in Tokyo. Alone. By choice. I walked through snow-covered gardens, ate ramen in silence, and at midnight, I wrote a single sentence in my journal. I used to think freedom was leaving. Turns out, it's staying gone. There's no dramatic showdown. No court battle. No viral post or flaming group chat meltdown. Just a clean cut. A life reclaimed. A line drawn with surgical precision. They taught me that showing up makes you family. So I showed up for myself. And I never looked back. I was 3 weeks out from the happiest day of my life when my brother decided to blow it all up. My name's Spencer. I'm 32 years old, live in Colorado, and until recently, I thought my family, flawed as they were, would always have my back. I don't mean that in a corny, TV sitcom way. I just mean that no matter how much we bickered or disagreed, there were boundaries you didn't cross, lines you didn't even look at, especially not during your brother's wedding prep. Growing up, I was the steady sibling, not the golden child. That title belonged to my younger brother, Tyler, but the one who handled things. If something broke, I fixed it. If Mom needed help with the taxes, I was her guy. When our dad passed away 5 years ago, I was the one who drove Tyler to the funeral because he'd gotten drunk the night before and left his car in a ditch. I didn't resent that. I really didn't. It was just the dynamic. Tyler messed up. I cleaned it up. Tyler is, well, complicated. He's 29, charming in that slippery, overconfident way that makes waitresses laugh at his bad jokes and gets him out of parking tickets. He was the kind of kid who skated through life on charisma alone. When we were younger, I used to envy him. How easily people gravitated toward him. How our mom always defended him, even when he was blatantly in the wrong. But somewhere along the way, that envy faded. I had my own path. I built a quiet, stable life. I worked in IT, bought a house, and 3 years ago, I met someone who made all of it feel like it meant something. Her name's Lila. We met at a coffee shop when I spilled an entire large mocha on her coat. I was mortified. She laughed. And from that moment on, she just got me. Lila is smart, grounded, and kind in a way that makes you believe people can still surprise you for the better. She works as a social worker and has this sixth sense for people. She reads them like open books. But when it came to Tyler, even she struggled. He was charming, sure, but there was always something off. Too much flattery. Too many lingering stares. Too many weirdly personal jokes he'd make when I wasn't around. Still, I never really questioned it. Not until the engagement. Tyler had this weird reaction when I told him I was going to propose. It wasn't overt, but I remember the way his smile faltered for a second before he slapped me on the back and said, "About time, man. Just don't blow it." At the time, I thought he was just being Tyler, but the seed was planted. Over the next year, things started piling up. Little things. Comments he'd make to Lila when they were alone, which she always told me about later. "You really think Spencer's the one?" he once asked her during a family barbecue while I was out grabbing more charcoal. Or the time he sent her a playlist, just for fun, with songs that were all breakup anthems. Lila showed me the messages each time, laughed them off, said, "Your brother's got issues," and we moved on. But the vibe kept getting weirder. At our engagement party, I found Tyler cornering Lila in the kitchen, whispering something. She looked uncomfortable. When I asked her about it later, she hesitated. He said, he used to have a crush on me. But it was nothing, just awkward timing. I wanted to confront him, but Lila begged me not to. It'll just create more drama. Let's not start something before the wedding. So I didn't. I let it slide. Like I always did. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 was assuming Tyler would know how to behave during the wedding planning process. He was supposed to be my best man. I figured, hey, maybe this is a chance for him to grow up, bond a little, do something selfless for once. But he was flaky from the start, showed up late to the tux fitting, forgot to send the RSVP reminders to the groomsmen, and made it all about him at the bachelor party. At one point during drinks, he loudly joked that Lila was way out of my league and that I must have blackmailed her or something. Everyone laughed. I did too. But it hit me in the gut. The final straw came 2.5 weeks before the wedding. I was at work, finishing up a client presentation, when my phone buzzed with a message from Tyler. "Call me ASAP. It's about Lila." My stomach dropped. I called immediately, thinking maybe she'd been in an accident or gotten sick or something serious. But no. When he answered, his voice was calm. Too calm. "I wasn't going to tell you this, man," he began. "But I can't let you marry someone who's not being honest with you." I felt cold all over. "What are you talking about?" "She told me she has feelings for me," he said, almost regretfully. Said she was confused. Said she wasn't sure she could go through with the wedding. "She's been messaging me behind your back. I didn't want to hurt you, but you needed to know." I didn't speak for a few seconds. I couldn't. My brain was trying to wrap itself around what I'd just heard. I remember my hand gripping the phone tighter, my heartbeat spiking. "You're lying," I said quietly. He sighed. "I wish I was. I really do. But if I were you, I'd talk to her. Ask to see her phone. Look through the messages. You'll see for yourself." He hung up before I could respond. I just sat there, stunned. The office around me kept humming. People typing, phones ringing, but it all felt distant. Like I was underwater. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. Could it be true? Had Lila been hiding something from me? Was there some part of her I hadn't seen? When I got home that night, she was on the couch watching reruns of The Office. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, babe. Everything okay?" I didn't answer right away. Just sat down and looked at her. Really looked at her. "Tyler called me," I said finally. "He told me you've been messaging him. That you have feelings for him." Lila blinked. And then she laughed. Not a little giggle, but a full, genuine, disbelieving laugh. Are you serious? I need to know the truth, I said. My voice cracked. She stood up, walked over to me, and put her phone in my hands. Check it yourself. All our messages. I've got nothing to hide. And I did. And what I found flipped everything on its head. Because she had been messaging him. But not in the way he claimed. The texts were all there. Every single one. Hey, that joke you made at the dinner last night made me uncomfortable. Please stop. I'm with Spencer. I love him. This needs to stop. Do not message me again unless it's something related to the wedding. You're crossing the line. And the worst one, sent just 2 days before. Tyler, if you ever imply again that I'm having second thoughts, I will tell Spencer everything you've been saying. I read through the whole thread, my hands shaking. She sat next to me the entire time, silent, letting me process. No pressure, no defensiveness, just quiet strength. When I looked at her, I felt like crying. I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier, she said softly. I thought if I ignored him, he'd stop. But he didn't. He got worse. And I didn't want to cause problems between you two. I couldn't even speak. I just nodded, hugged her, held on. And then, something flipped in me. Because this wasn't just sibling rivalry. This was betrayal, manipulation, a full-on attempt to destroy the one good thing in my life. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let Tyler walk away without consequences. I just didn't know yet how far it would go. But the opportunity presented itself in the most unexpected way. And that's when I invited his wife to lunch. I didn't sleep that night. Even after Lila and I talked it through, after I saw the texts, after she reassured me again and again that she loved me and had never, ever entertained Tyler's pathetic fantasy, I just lay there in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Something was broken. Not between us. Between me and my brother. And maybe, if I was being honest, it had always been broken. I just refused to look at it until now. The next morning, I sat in my car outside work for a solid 15 minutes before going in. I kept asking myself the same question. Why? Why would Tyler do this? Why now? Was he trying to sabotage the wedding because he couldn't stand to see me happy? Was it about Lila? Or was this just who he'd always been? And I was only now seeing it clearly? I didn't have an answer. But I did have a new sense of clarity. I was done playing the older brother who cleaned up his messes. Still, I didn't confront him. Not right away. I needed time. And more importantly, I needed a plan. Because if Tyler was willing to lie, manipulate, and spin that kind of story about his own brother's fiancée, then I had to assume there was more to uncover. The first sign that this was bigger than just an isolated incident came a few days later when my mom called. She didn't even say hello. Spencer, she said, her voice tight. Did you really accuse Tyler of trying to steal your fiancé? I closed my eyes. No, Mom. He told me she had feelings for him. I checked her messages. He's been harassing her for months. There was a long pause. Tyler wouldn't do that, she said quietly. He told me you've been paranoid. That you're projecting your own doubts onto him. I laughed. Bitterly. He showed up uninvited to her work one day and waited outside just to walk her to her car. She told me after the fact because she didn't want to stir things up. He's been sending her weird texts, making creepy comments, and you think I'm the problem? You've always been so serious, she snapped suddenly, and the shift stunned me. Always overthinking everything. Maybe Lila's not as into you as you think. Maybe she just didn't want to hurt your feelings. There it was. The hammer. The same tone she used when we were kids and Tyler wrecked something, and somehow I ended up grounded. That old, familiar flavor of disappointment directed at the wrong son. You're defending him? I asked, my voice sharp. He's your brother, she said, as if that was supposed to mean something now. And he's been really upset. You embarrassed him. You need to fix this before the wedding. The phone call ended with me saying something I hadn't said to her in years. I'm not asking for your approval anymore. And I don't need your help planning this wedding. It stung, but it was also freeing. I told Lila about the call. She just shook her head. I don't get it. Why does your mom always side with him? Because she always has, I said. And maybe she needs him to be the golden child. Otherwise, she'd have to look at everything she let slide. But the hits kept coming. That weekend, we had a family dinner planned. Just a casual get-together at my mom's place with the excuse of celebrating the upcoming wedding. Lila didn't want to go. I didn't either. But I felt like I needed to be there. Needed to see how deep this ran. We arrived and were greeted by an awkward silence. Tyler was already there, sitting on the patio with a drink in hand, sunglasses on like he was auditioning for some reality show. His wife, Rachel, was beside him, smiling, oblivious. At least for now. I greeted her warmly. She hugged me and whispered, "I'm so happy for you too," like none of the chaos was happening. Either she didn't know, or she was pretending not to know. I couldn't tell which was worse. Dinner was strained. My mom barely looked at me. My aunt, who was always a little too cozy with Tyler, kept asking Lila if she was nervous to commit so young, even though we were both in our 30s. And Tyler? He spent the whole evening smugly sipping wine, cracking jokes about marriage. At one point, while Lila and Rachel were in the kitchen getting dessert, Tyler leaned across the table and said, "Still going through with it, huh?" I didn't answer. He smiled. "You're making a mistake. But hey, I'll be there. Front row, watching the train crash." And then, with a wink, "Unless she changes her mind before then." That's when I knew this wasn't just some awkward obsession. He wanted to wreck me, to humiliate me. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly across the floor, and excused myself. Lila followed me to the car, concerned. I told her what he said. She didn't even look shocked, just angry. "We can't keep letting this slide," she said. "It's not just you anymore. He's messing with our life." And she was right. It wasn't about keeping the peace anymore. It was about drawing a line. The next morning, I sent Tyler a text. "You're no longer my best man. Don't contact Lila again." He replied instantly. "Wow, insecure much? She'll come around." That was it. That was the moment something inside me broke completely. This wasn't some tragic misunderstanding. This was war. And then came the final piece of the puzzle, the one that took my rage and gave it direction. Rachel called me, out of the blue. "Hey," she said, cheerful. "We still good for our wedding gift exchange on Sunday?" I blinked. "What? Didn't Lila tell you?" "I suggested we do a little brunch, just the four of us. Exchange something sentimental before the wedding. Like a memory gift or something. I thought it'd be cute." My mouth went dry. "Yeah," I said slowly. "That sounds great. Let me talk to Lila. I'll get back to you." I hung up and turned to Lila, who looked just as confused. "She never mentioned this to me," she said. "I thought you planned something." We both realized the same thing at once. Tyler had set this up. It was the perfect opportunity. A cozy little brunch. A private moment. Just the four of us. And all he needed was for Lila to look uncertain, or for me to look angry, and he could spin another lie. Probably try to play it off like they'd had a moment, and hope Rachel caught on. But now it was our opportunity. We spent that night combing through everything. Every message he'd sent. Every screenshot. Every time he showed up uninvited or crossed the line. We compiled it all. Lila even dug up an old voicemail she'd saved. One where he drunkenly confessed, "If you ever change your mind, I'll be here." We weren't sure what Rachel knew, but she deserved the truth. So I texted her the next morning. "Brunch sounds perfect. Let's do it at that new cafe downtown. Just us." Tyler didn't reply to the group chat for hours. When he finally did, all he said was, "Looking forward to it." And that's where we left it. The plan wasn't fully formed yet, but the wheels were in motion. Tyler didn't know it yet, but brunch was going to be a turning point. For all of us. And when Rachel saw the messages, well, let's just say he wouldn't be attending the wedding. Not as best man, not as a brother, and not as a husband. The night before the brunch, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. A half-finished document was open, originally our wedding itinerary. I'd spent weeks piecing it together. Dinner timelines, speech order, seating charts. Now, it just looked like a blueprint of something slowly unraveling. My brother had turned the lead up to our wedding into a chessboard, and I had let him play both sides for too long. Lila had gone to bed early. She was emotionally drained. We both were. But while she slept upstairs, I stayed up, rereading every message Tyler had ever sent her, cataloging his manipulation, and organizing it into a clean, undeniable timeline. I wasn't doing it to be petty. I was doing it to protect what we had left. To protect her. To protect us. I labeled each file by date and content. The last one I titled The Beginning of the End. When I finally shut the laptop and turned out the kitchen light, the silence hit me. It was thick, almost too much. And that's when I realized something I hadn't let myself feel until now. Shame. Not for what Tyler had done, but for how long I'd let him get away with it. I had always believed that family was sacred, that no matter how bad things got, blood was thicker. I told myself I was being mature by letting things slide, that I was choosing peace. But peace had a price, and I'd been paying it for decades without realizing I was the only one handing over anything. That night, I cried. Not loudly. Not the kind of crying you see in movies with fists pounding against walls or heads thrown back in anguish. It was quieter than that. A slow, steady unraveling. I leaned against the kitchen counter, wiped my face with my sleeve, and let myself feel everything I'd been bottling up for years. The memories started rolling in. All the times Mom blamed me for Tyler's mistakes. All the birthdays where he forgot to show up and I made excuses for him. The time I broke up with a girl in college and he hooked up with her a month later. The time Dad tried to discipline him and Mom stepped in, saying, "He's just passionate." The countless second chances. The way he always took and I always gave. And now, he tried to take Lila. But this time he failed. And that failure was going to cost him everything. Brunch was scheduled for 11:30 a.m. The cafe was one of those Instagram-worthy spots with pastel walls, string lights, and tiny plants on every table. It should have been the perfect pre-wedding photo op. Instead, it felt like walking into a silent courtroom. Lila and I arrived early. I'd printed out selected messages and voicemails, each placed neatly in a plain envelope. We ordered coffee, waited in silence. My leg bounced uncontrollably under the table. At 11:28, Rachel walked in. She looked flawless, as always, peach blouse, gold earrings, a smile that could brighten a room. But the moment her eyes met mine, I saw something flicker behind them. Maybe confusion, maybe concern. Tyler followed a minute later. Sunglasses again, indoors this time. Trying way too hard. He kissed Rachel on the cheek and gave me a smirk like we were in on some inside joke. We made small talk at first. Rachel asked about the florist. Lila told her about the cake tasting. Tyler made some offhand comment about how marriage is just legalized codependency, and Rachel elbowed him playfully. But her laugh didn't quite reach her eyes. Then came the moment. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the envelope, and slid it across the table to Rachel. "What's this?" she asked, blinking. I looked at Tyler. He froze. "Something you should have seen a long time ago." Rachel glanced between us, then slowly opened it. At first, she skimmed. Then she read more closely. Her eyebrows drew together. She reached the printed messages, screenshots of text from Tyler to Lila, including one particularly disturbing late-night message. "If you just said the word, I'd be gone before sunrise. You know you don't belong with him." Her hands began to shake. Lila spoke, her voice steady. "He's been harassing me for almost a year. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to hurt Spencer. But I can't keep pretending it's okay." Tyler reached forward, trying to grab the papers. "This is taken out of context. She flirted with me first." Rachel recoiled. "Don't touch me." His smile cracked. "Rach, come on. She's manipulating you. She's always had it out for me." "Enough." Her voice cut through the cafe noise like a blade. She looked at me. "Thank you for telling me." Then she stood up. "I need to go." Tyler followed her, sputtering half-formed excuses, but she walked faster. Out the door. Around the corner. Gone. And just like that, brunch was over. We sat there for a while after that. Tyler never came back inside. I don't know where he went. But I do know that was the last time I ever saw him with a wedding ring on his hand. You'd think that would have felt like the moment of triumph. But it didn't. In the days after brunch, I felt hollow. Word got around quickly. Rachel called my mom. And she, of course, blamed me for the fallout. "You humiliated your brother in public," she hissed during our next call. "You broke up a marriage." "No," I said calmly. "He did that. I just turned the lights on." But that didn't stop the storm. Tyler started messaging mutual friends, painting himself as the victim. That I was insecure, controlling. That Lila had led him on, and I'd taken things too far. Some people bought it. Others didn't. But even when I was in the right, it still hurt. Losing people you thought were neutral observers. Hearing them say, "It's a family matter, we shouldn't take sides." Like silence wasn't its own form of betrayal. Like neutrality didn't have a weight to it. I started pulling back. Unfriending people. Muting group chats. Saying no to invites. I wasn't angry. I was just tired. But Lila? She was a light through all of it. She never wavered. She held my hand through each moment, sent me ridiculous memes when I looked too serious, made our apartment feel like home, even when it felt like the rest of the world was collapsing. We talked a lot in those weeks before the wedding. Not just about logistics or guest lists, but about us. About how easily things could have been destroyed if we hadn't trusted each other. about how sometimes the worst moments in life show you the strength of what you've built. And somewhere in that slow healing, I found something else: self-worth. For the first time in my life, I started looking back at everything I'd done, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I had been the steady one, the reliable one, the peacemaker, the fixer. But that didn't make me weak. That made me strong. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. I wrote about my dad, about the way he used to talk to me during late-night drives, about how he'd always tell me, "Don't mistake silence for peace." Sometimes the loudest person in the room is the one who needs to be left behind. I started going on morning runs, not to escape, but to move forward. I deleted the wedding itinerary document and built a new one from scratch. Every line felt like a step away from what I'd allowed, and a step toward who I wanted to be. We restructured the wedding party. One of my college friends, Mason, stepped in as best man. Lila's sister took over as maid of honor. We even made a few changes to the guest list. Tyler was no longer invited. Neither was my mom. It wasn't a dramatic announcement, just a quiet line drawn. We mailed them a simple note. "Due to recent events and for the peace of our ceremony, we've decided to move forward without your attendance. We wish you well." That was it. Lila and I stood at the mailbox together, held hands, and dropped it in. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like freedom. And just when I thought things couldn't shift any further, I got a call that changed everything again. It was Rachel, and she had something to show me. Something that would flip the whole story upside down and give me one final, unexpected card to play. Rachel's call came 3 days after brunch. I was sitting in the backyard, watching our dog chew mercilessly on a destroyed tennis ball when my phone buzzed. I hadn't spoken to her since that morning at the cafe. Part of me thought I never would. I imagined she was processing the betrayal in her own way, quietly, privately, like I had done for so long. So when I saw her name on the screen, my stomach clenched. I answered on the second ring. "Spencer," she said, her voice calmer than I expected. "I think we need to talk." I stood up slowly. "Of course. Everything okay?" There was a pause, and then I found something. "Something you need to see." We agreed to meet at a local park, somewhere neutral. Lila offered to come, but Rachel asked to speak with me alone. "It's not about her," she said. "Not directly." When I arrived, Rachel was already there, sitting at a bench near the pond, a manila folder clutched in her lap. She looked different, sharper somehow. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, no makeup, eyes clear and unreadable. She didn't greet me with a hug this time, just nodded and gestured for me to sit. "I've spent the last few days going through everything," she said. "Emails, bank records, our shared accounts. I needed to understand what was real and what was just lies." I didn't say anything, just let her talk. Rachel opened the folder and slid a few papers across to me. They were printouts, transaction records from a joint savings account I didn't know she and Tyler had. "Notice anything?" she asked. I scanned the page. Multiple withdrawals. Small amounts at first, $200 here, $150 there. Then larger ones. $800, $1,200. Several labeled as business expenses. Others with no notes at all. "I never authorized these," she said. "And when I checked the dates, I realized most of them aligned with the months leading up to your engagement." My brow furrowed. "You think he was spending it on what? Gifts? Hotels?" "Worse," she said. "He was paying someone to spy on Lila." I froze. I found a string of payments to a private investigator based in Boulder. When I called pretending to be Tyler, the guy confirmed he was hired to follow her. "Get photos. See if she was cheating on you." My throat went dry. "He tried to frame her." Rachel nodded. "He told the PI he wanted proof Lila wasn't faithful. But I don't think he ever planned to show you the results. I think he just wanted ammunition in case she rejected him again, or to use it to push her into silence." A slow wave of nausea rolled through me. I had suspected manipulation, but surveillance? "He stalked her," I whispered. Rachel nodded grimly. "And there's more." She pulled out a second sheet, an email forwarded from her account. I read the header. It was from Tyler, sent to a friend of his named Caleb. Subject line, leverage. The body? "If this thing with Lila doesn't pan out, I've got backup." Found some dirt from her college days. Might be enough to shake things up if Spencer goes through with the wedding. I'm not going to let him win again. Not this time. My hands tightened into fists. Not this time. I looked at Rachel. "What does that mean, again? Has this happened before?" She looked down, lips pressed into a thin line. I didn't want to believe it at first, but yeah, he's always seen you as the one who got the life he was supposed to have. He used to complain about it all the time. Said you were Dad's favorite. That you only got ahead because you played the good boy. I laughed bitterly. He means because I didn't lie and steal? Rachel didn't laugh. He always felt like the world owed him something. And when you proposed to Lila, it broke something in him. He couldn't stand that you got love, that you got loyalty. I leaned back on the bench, winded. The pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle they created was uglier than I'd imagined. I had known Tyler was selfish, petty, entitled. I hadn't known he was dangerous. Rachel reached into the folder one last time and handed me a flash drive. What's this? Voice recordings. I put one of those keychain mics in his car a few months ago. It was supposed to be for safety in case of break-ins. But he talks to himself. A lot. And he doesn't hold back. I stared at the tiny piece of plastic in my hand like it was radioactive. You're giving me this? I asked. She nodded. He doesn't deserve protection anymore. Not after this. And with that, she stood up and walked away. When I got home, I played the recordings. It took me hours to sift through them. Most were boring, traffic noises, music, the occasional phone call. But then, on a clip labeled 04_17_evening, I heard his voice clearly. She'll come around. They always do. Spencer's too weak to keep her. She wants someone exciting, someone who can take charge. Once she sees what he really is, boring, needy, scared, she'll run. And I'll be right there. In another, from a week before brunch. If this doesn't work, I'll burn it all down. Wedding, job, whatever. He doesn't get to win. Not this time. It was all there. His obsession, his entitlement, his plan. I sat in silence for a long time afterward. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was clear. This wasn't about revenge. This was about ending the cycle. But I wasn't going to scream or throw punches. I wasn't going to send threatening texts or stage some dramatic confrontation. I was going to do what I always did, build something solid, thoughtful, unbreakable. Only this time, I wouldn't be fixing someone else's mess. I'd be making sure Tyler couldn't create another one. The next few days were a flurry of quiet activity. I contacted a lawyer. Not because I planned to sue, but because I wanted to understand what protections I could put in place. Tyler had crossed lines I never imagined. I wasn't taking chances anymore. I asked the lawyer about defamation, harassment, emotional distress. He confirmed that with the recordings, the texts, and Rachel's testimony, I could absolutely build a case if needed. I filed a police report, not to press charges yet, but to create a paper trail. I gave them the recordings, the texts, the PI's contact. They took it seriously. Then I contacted our wedding videographer and made a special request that they prepare a private video montage for me. A short clip to be played at the rehearsal dinner. It wouldn't go public. It wouldn't be part of the official wedding reel, but it would contain everything I needed. I edited it myself. 3 minutes long. Clip 1. Tyler at our engagement party, making a toast. Clip 2. The voice recording of him calling me weak and boring. Clip 3. A screenshot of the leverage email. Clip 4. Rachel's voice, quietly stating, "He tried to destroy your relationship." And mine. The final clip? Me, looking into the camera, saying, "I used to think family meant forgiving everything, even betrayal. I don't think that anymore. Sometimes, to protect what matters, you have to close the door and never open it again." I saved it on a flash drive and handed it to Mason, my new best man, with simple instructions. Only play it if Tyler shows up uninvited. He nodded. You really think he'll try? I looked out the window. I think he doesn't know how to lose. The day before the wedding, I got one final message from Tyler. No subject. Just 3 words. You'll regret this. I didn't reply, but I smiled when I read it. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't scared of him. He should have regretted ever thinking I was someone he could manipulate. And tomorrow, he'd finally learn what it felt like to be powerless. The morning of the wedding, the sky was clear. No clouds. No wind. The kind of stillness that made everything feel intentional, like even the weather had paused to witness what was about to unfold. Lila and I didn't speak much as we got ready. Not because we were nervous, but because there was an unspoken calm between us. A quiet acknowledgement of everything we'd weathered. Every betrayal, every hard conversation, every moment where the entire structure of our relationship had been tested and had held. stronger than ever. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my cufflinks, and caught my reflection. Not just the tucks or the hair or the clean shave, but me, my posture, my eyes. I looked ready. For everything. For marriage. For confrontation. For closure. The venue was beautiful. We'd chosen a small vineyard just outside of town. Rows of green vines stretched toward the horizon, sunlight catching on the leaves like gold. Guests began arriving early, laughing, greeting each other, taking photos in front of the flower arch. I moved through the crowd with a kind of floaty detachment, half listening to congratulations, half focused on the one thing I knew was coming. Because even though Tyler hadn't RSVP'd, I knew he'd show. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for 5 p.m., a casual pre-wedding gathering of just the closest family and friends. We'd rented out a private room at a nearby bistro, low lighting, jazz in the background, candles flickering on every table. It was everything Lila wanted, warm, intimate, meaningful, and it was the perfect stage. Mason had the flash drive in his inner jacket pocket. He'd tested the projector twice already. He gave me a subtle nod when I walked in. Everything was in place. The only variable was Tyler. Sure enough, at 5:47 p.m., he arrived. Uninvited. He strolled in wearing a slim black suit, no tie, sunglasses on despite being indoors. Like he thought he was the villain in some Netflix drama. A few heads turned. The room went still. I saw Lila's hand tighten around her champagne flute. Rachel, who'd bravely chosen to attend, sat 2 tables away and didn't even look up. Tyler headed straight for me. "Spence," he said smoothly, clapping me on the shoulder. "Heard the party couldn't start without me." "Actually," I said calmly, "it's just about to end." Before he could respond, Mason stepped forward, smiling like a host at a fundraiser. "If I could get everyone's attention for a moment," he said, raising his glass. "Before we dig into dinner, Spencer asked me to share a little something. A short video. Just a few memories." Lila rose quietly and walked over to me. We stood side by side as Mason connected the flash drive to the projector. The screen flickered to life. It started with laughter, clips from our engagement party, birthday celebrations, goofy moments with our dog. A few guests clapped softly, some let out nostalgic sighs. Tyler smirked, arms crossed. Then came the second half. His smirk faded instantly. His voice filled the room. That unmistakable recording from the car. "She'll come around. They always do. Spencer's too weak to keep her." People began turning, whispering. Another clip. The email. The one he sent to Caleb. Leverage. The room shifted. Then Rachel's voice. "He tried to destroy your relationship. And mine." And finally, my face on screen. Calm. Resolved. Sometimes, to protect what matters, you have to close the door and never open it again. Silence. The lights came back on. Mason stepped away. No one clapped. No one spoke. I turned to Tyler. His face was frozen. Pale. Caught between rage and fear. His confidence cracked like glass under pressure. "You did this," he hissed at me. "You set me up?" "No," I said. "You did this. I just stopped covering for you." He looked around, searching for allies. None came. My mom wasn't there. She'd declined the invitation. Said she couldn't support a wedding built on division. Fine by me. Aunt Karen was staring at him with her mouth half open. Even his former groomsmen, guys he used to party with, wouldn't meet his eye. Rachel stood up slowly. "I filed for divorce this morning," she said, her voice clear. "The paperwork's already at your office. You'll find your stuff packed by the end of the weekend." Tyler's mouth opened, but no words came out. He took a shaky step toward her. "Ratch, come on. You're not going to." "I'm done, Tyler," she said, backing away. "I gave you every chance to be decent. But you're a parasite, and I'm not feeding you anymore." Then she turned to me and Lila, gave a small nod, and walked out. Tyler stood there, isolated, the center of a storm he'd created with no umbrella left. "I'll ruin you," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "You already did that to yourself." Security, who Mason had discreetly arranged ahead of time, walked over and placed a gentle but firm hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Time to go, sir." He didn't fight it, just yanked his arm away, turned, and stormed out. No more words. No more grand speeches. Just the click of the door closing behind him. That was the last time I saw him. The wedding the next day was perfect. The vineyard glowed under the afternoon sun. The music floated through the air like a hymn. And Lila. Lila walked down the aisle like she had stars in her eyes and nothing could touch her. When we exchanged vows, mine cracked with emotion. But I didn't care, because I meant every word. I vow to never let fear silence me again, I said, and to protect what we've built, even if it means walking away from people I once called family. She squeezed my hand so tightly I thought I might break. But I didn't. I just stood taller. After the ceremony, guests kept coming up to us saying it was the most heartfelt wedding they'd ever seen. There were tears, laughter. Even the DJ cried at one point. And somewhere during the reception, I found myself standing alone again, watching Lila dance with her father. The same spot I'd stood in before this whole mess began. Only this time, I didn't feel hollow. I felt whole, complete. Not because I got revenge, but because I took my life back. Rachel and I still talk. She's doing well, moved to a new apartment, started therapy, even adopted a cat. She once joked that Tyler did her a favor by blowing everything up. I wouldn't have had the strength to walk away, she admitted. But you did, and that gave me mine. As for my mother, we're distant. She sends a birthday card once a year. No return address. No apology. I've stopped expecting one. Some losses are necessary. Tyler never responded to the police inquiry. The PI eventually turned over his side of things, and while nothing escalated legally, the record is there, waiting, if he ever tries anything again. But I don't think he will. Because for the first time in his life, someone didn't fold under his pressure. Someone stood up and told the truth, and everyone saw him for who he really was. Months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Lila and I sat on the back porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. She reached over, took my hand, and said, "Do you think he'll ever apologize?" I looked out across the yard, smiled faintly, and said, "I don't need him to. Because the door is shut. The past is behind us, and I'm done giving power to people who never deserved it." I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the peace settle in. And for the first time in my life, silence didn't feel like surrender. It felt like victory. My name is Daniel. I'm 58, and until recently, I thought I'd done a decent job as a father. I never expected to be the perfect parent. No one is, but I showed up. I paid for piano lessons, braces, college tuition, all the summer camps, and the emergency tire blowouts. I was the kind of dad who rearranged board meetings to make it to school plays. I don't say this to brag. I say it because I thought it meant something. Especially to my daughter, Claire. Claire is 27 now. Ambitious, brilliant, beautiful. Her mother and I divorced when she was 9, and while custody was split 50-50, I always had to put in more effort to stay in her life. Her mom remarried a year later to a man named Greg. He's a dentist, quiet type, wears polo shirts even in the winter. Claire called him Greg for years, until she turned 15 and suddenly, it was Dad Greg, and I became Daniel. That stung, but I swallowed it. She was a teenager trying to figure out her life, and I didn't want to add to the chaos. Still, I stayed present. When she got into Northwestern, I cried on the phone. When she broke her leg skiing senior year, I flew out and stayed in a crummy motel just to drive her to physical therapy. I thought we had healed whatever drifted between us during the teen years. We had inside jokes again, Sunday brunches when she came back home, long phone calls about job interviews and apartment hunting. So when she told me she was getting married, I thought, this is it. Full circle. I'll get to walk my daughter down the aisle, be part of her happiest day, maybe even give a toast that brings the house down. She asked me to help with the wedding early on. Not just emotionally, but financially. It won't be huge, she said. But you know, venues and photographers are expensive. I didn't even hesitate. I told her I'd contribute $40,000. She hugged me, said, "You're the best, Dad." And I let that word sink in. Dad. Things started to feel off about 6 months before the wedding. I wasn't being looped in on much anymore. At first, I chalked it up to her being overwhelmed. Planning a wedding is no joke. But then I started noticing little things, her referring to Greg and her mom as the parental team, casually mentioning how Greg was covering the alcohol or how Dad Greg helped her pick the venue. When I offered to help with the seating chart, she laughed and said, "Don't worry, Daniel. Mom and Dad are all over it." I didn't say anything. I just stared at my phone afterward and wondered when exactly I had been replaced. About a week before the ceremony, Claire invited me to the final rehearsal dinner. "You'll walk me down the aisle?" "Of course," she said over the phone. "But please, Daniel, don't make it about you, okay?" This isn't the time for awkward emotions. I remember sitting in my kitchen, looking at the framed photo of us from her high school graduation, her in her cap and gown, me beaming, and feeling like someone had slowly started erasing me from my own life. I showed up to the dinner, smiled through it, laughed when I was supposed to, shook hands with extended family and future in-laws. Greg was, of course, the star of the evening. Toasts were made in his honor. He's been like a second father to her, someone said. I nearly choked on my drink. Then the program for the wedding arrived. A printed, bound booklet with bios, thank yous, and a full itinerary. My name wasn't in it. Not once. Under Father of the Bride, it said Gregory A. Walters. There was a 2-paragraph blurb about how he had been a rock in Claire's life since she was a child, how he'd shaped her view of what a good man looks like. I flipped through the rest, stunned. I wasn't mentioned. I wasn't thanked. Not even a footnote. Just Daniel, the guy walking her down the aisle. A seat filler. When I asked Claire about it, she brushed it off. Oh, come on. You're still walking me down the aisle, Daniel. That's huge. But Greg raised me too, you know. I just didn't want to confuse anyone. Confuse anyone? I repeated, the words sour in my mouth. She gave me a look like I was being dramatic. Don't make this a big thing. Please. It's not about you. Just let me have my day. I left the rehearsal that night feeling like a ghost. Invisible. Disposable. I drove home and sat in the driveway for an hour. 40 grand. That's what I had contributed to this farce. I covered the dress, the flowers, the catering deposit, the music. And now I was being told, explicitly, not to make it about me, like I was some kind of emotional liability. I slept terribly that night. My stomach was in knots. The morning of the wedding, I was supposed to arrive early to help usher a few guests and prepare for the walk down the aisle. I brought my suit, shined my shoes, and even wore the tie Claire said she liked on me. But something was shifting in me, something that had been simmering for months, maybe years. The disrespect wasn't new. It had just reached a breaking point. I got to the venue, handed off the car keys to the valet, and walked in. Greg was already there, smiling like the king of the castle. Claire was getting her makeup done in the bridal suite, so I figured I had a little time. I wandered into the back office, where the venue coordinator was sorting out the balance due. I leaned on the edge of the desk and asked her, calmly, "Hey, could you remind me what's left to pay?" She gave me the number. Not a small one. "And this is all under my account, right?" I asked. "Yes," she said, tapping on the keyboard. "The final installment will clear once the ceremony starts. Scheduled to auto-process at 2 p.m. I took a deep breath. "Cancel it." She blinked. "Sir, I'm pulling my payment. Cancel the auto charge." "But this will cause an issue with the—" "I know." I handed her my ID to confirm authorization. "But if I'm not good enough to be listed as the father of the bride, then I don't need to fund this charade." That's when things started to unravel. And trust me, it only got messier from there. The look on the coordinator's face was a mix of panic and confusion. She sputtered something about contracts and late fees, but I wasn't backing down. I repeated myself, calmly but firmly, "You have authorization to cancel the payment. If there's a breach clause, direct it to me." She stared at her screen for a moment longer, then nodded slowly, knowing she couldn't override the person footing the bill. I stepped outside the office and took a long breath. The courtyard was filled with soft music and laughter. Rows of white chairs. Guests starting to arrive. A flower girl chasing bubbles. For a brief second, I thought about going through with it all anyway. For the sake of peace. For the sake of family. But then I remembered how Claire had looked at me last night, like I was some ancient obligation to be managed. Not a parent. Not a human being. Just a wallet with a name she didn't want printed. Greg was mingling near the bar, laughing with the groom and some of his golf buddies. I walked up behind him. "We need to talk," I said. He turned around, his smile faltering. "Now's not really the— Now is the time," I cut in. "You knew about the program. You knew I wasn't mentioned." He glanced around, clearly trying to avoid a scene. "Daniel, this isn't the place." "You're damn right it's not the place. But it's also not the place for a man to take credit for raising someone he didn't support a day in his life." "Did you pay for Northwestern? The down payment on her first car? That internship rent in DC? No, you showed up when things were already cushy. So don't give me that dad smile like you earned anything today." He stiffened but didn't argue. I didn't give him a chance. I walked away before he could say anything else. It was just past 1:30 when I finally made my way to the bridal suite. Claire was sitting in front of a mirror, her makeup artist just finishing her eyes. Her dress was gorgeous, lace sleeves, subtle shimmer in the skirt, and for a second, I saw the little girl she used to be. But that image shattered the moment she turned and saw me. "Daniel," she said, clearly annoyed, "why are you barging in? You're supposed to be outside." "I canceled the final wedding payment," I said, without a pause. Her jaw dropped. "You what?" "I pulled the $40,000. The venue, the vendors, they'll be notified any minute now." "You can't do that," she shrieked, standing up. "Are you kidding me? The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. What is wrong with you?" I stayed calm. I'd rehearsed this moment all night in my head. I was told not to make this day about me. Fine, but don't expect me to bankroll a fantasy where I'm not even acknowledged. I was good enough to write checks, but not good enough to be listed as your father? You wanted Greg to be your dad today? Let him pay for it. Her voice was rising in pitch and panic. This is completely insane. Everyone's here. The food's already being plated. The music. Do you know how bad this will make me look? "Claire," I said softly, "I would have given you the world. All I ever wanted was to feel like your father again. But I was erased. You chose to erase me. So now I'm choosing to step away." She opened her mouth like she wanted to scream, but the coordinator burst into the room behind me, breathless. "Ms. Reynolds? I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we just got notice from the florist and caterer. They've been put on hold. And the band, they're not setting up until the final payment clears." Claire turned ghost white. Her mother came in right after, dragging Greg behind her. "What is going on?" as she snapped. "Why is the staff acting like the wedding's canceled?" "Ask your husband," I said coldly, "or better yet, ask your daughter." Greg stepped forward, trying to smooth things over with that practiced, placating tone. "Daniel, come on now. You're better than this." "No, Greg. I was better than this. For years. But not today." Claire looked at her mother, then back at me, her face a mix of rage and fear. "You're seriously going to humiliate me like this? In front of everyone?" I just looked at her and said, "You already did that to me. You just didn't think I'd respond." I turned and walked out of the room before she could say anything else. The hallway was buzzing with murmurs as guests began to notice something was wrong. Staffers were quietly stepping back, unsure whether to proceed. My phone buzzed with a missed call from the venue. I ignored it. I walked through the garden toward the parking lot, past guests who looked confused, then concerned. I could hear whispers behind me. "Isn't that the father of the bride? Why is he leaving?" And somewhere behind me, Claire's voice rising above it all, trying to keep the illusion together. But illusions cost money, and I had just taken the magic one away. Now the clock was ticking. By the time I got to my car, my hands were shaking, not from nerves, but from the sheer weight of what I'd just done. For years, I'd let myself be sidelined. I'd smiled through birthdays where I was a second thought. I'd accepted Father's Day texts that said, "Thanks," instead of "love you." I let Claire and her mother reframe our family like I was some awkward footnote they were graciously allowing to hang around. But this was the first time I felt like I took my dignity back. I sat in the driver's seat with the door still open, listening to the ambient sounds drifting from the venue. The soft murmur of confused guests. The distant ring of silverware. The sharp, clipped sound of Claire's mother on her phone. Then, footsteps. Rapid ones. I looked in the mirror and saw Claire's fiancé, Jason, jogging toward me. He was a good kid. Quiet. MBA type. Little too polished for my taste. But he always shook my hand firmly and looked me in the eye. "Daniel," he called out, catching his breath by my window. "Please. I need to understand. What's happening?" I turned off the engine but didn't step out. "Ask your bride," I said. "I did," he said quickly. "She's panicking. She said you canceled the payment and walked out. She also told everyone Greg was her father," I said, keeping my voice even. "Did you see the program?" Jason blinked. "The little booklet thing?" "I mean, yeah, I skimmed it." "Did you notice my name in it?" He opened his mouth, then stopped. I don't think I did." "Because it wasn't there," I said. "Not once." He stood still for a moment, processing that. "Okay, but you're still her dad. You're still walking her down the aisle, right?" "Why would I walk a stranger down the aisle?" I asked, tilting my head. "Especially one who can't even admit I'm her father." Jason rubbed his face, clearly stressed. "Look, I get it. That's awful. I didn't know any of this. But canceling the payment? That's going to blow everything up." I gave a humorless chuckle. "Yeah, that's kind of the point." He looked at me like he didn't quite know whether to be angry or grateful. You really loved her, huh? I still do, I said quietly. But sometimes love means not letting yourself be trampled. If she wanted Greg to be the hero of the day, he can be. He can also be the one explaining why the band's not playing and the caterer's packing up. Jason nodded slowly, stepped back, and said, I should probably go manage the fallout. I nodded. Good luck. He turned and walked off, head down, already pulling out his phone. I waited a few more minutes, just breathing, letting the weight of everything settle. Part of me wondered if I'd regret this. If I'd look back and think, I should have just taken the insult and kept the peace. But another part of me, one that had been silent for years, was finally exhaling. Then came the next wave. My phone buzzed 6 times in a row. Claire. Then her mother. Then Greg. Then again Claire. Then Jason. Then, oddly enough, my ex's sister, Karen. I didn't pick up. I turned the phone off completely. Let them sit in it for a while. A few moments later, as I sat there watching the guests through the hedges like a silent observer of my own erasure, I saw it. The moment the planner approached the podium, whispered something to the officiant, and then chaos started to ripple through the chairs. Guests turning to each other, whispering. Someone checking their watch. A server carrying hors d'oeuvres pausing awkwardly. And then the real storm hit. Claire. She burst through the back patio doors like a gust of pure panic, still in her gown, heels clacking against the stone, veil slipping off one shoulder. Her eyes scanned the parking lot until they locked on me. She stormed toward the car, bridesmaids trailing behind her like a train of pink confusion. Daniel, she screamed. You are not doing this to me. I stepped out of the car, but didn't move toward her. She stopped a few feet away, her voice shaking now. Do you have any idea how cruel this is? Cruel? I repeated, stunned. Claire, you cut me out of your life in print. On your wedding day. In front of everyone. You didn't just forget. You made a conscious decision to act like I wasn't your father. I didn't mean it like that, she said, her voice cracking. It was just easier. Greg's been more present. I asked. More useful? More willing to pretend this version of the story fits the aesthetic? She didn't answer. I lowered my voice. I wanted this day to be perfect for you. I really did. But I won't fund a wedding where I'm expected to show up, smile, and then quietly disappear. That's not love, Claire. That's exploitation. One of her bridesmaids awkwardly tried to interject. Maybe we should just all calm. No. Claire snapped, eyes blazing now. He's doing this on purpose. To ruin my day. I just looked at her, calm now. No. You ruined it the moment you decided I didn't matter. Then I got back in my car. Behind me, I heard her call out again. Then another voice, Jason, probably, trying to pull her back inside. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I drove away slow on purpose. Past the cars, the confused relatives, the rental arch draped in flowers I paid for. And as I turned the corner, I saw the first of the vans arriving. The florist. Unloading, then pausing, waiting on a call that would never come. Because Dad wasn't footing the bill anymore. And Dad was no longer pretending to be invisible. But little did I know, that was just the start. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I pulled into a quiet overlook about 10 minutes from the venue. One of those spots you only remember when you need to think. It was a hilltop that looked over the town where Claire grew up. From there, I could see the steeples of old churches, the tops of office buildings, and even the edge of the park where I used to push her on the swings when she was 5. It felt strangely poetic. Like I was watching the final scene of a movie I never auditioned for, just played in silently until the credits rolled. I stayed there for nearly an hour. No music, no distractions, just the wind moving across the dashboard and the silence that follows a storm you never wanted to cause, but had no choice but to. By the time I turned my phone back on, I had 32 missed calls, a dozen voicemails, and more texts than I could count. I scrolled past most of them, but a few stood out. Jason, please call me. I don't think we can fix this, but I want to try. My ex-wife, what is wrong with you? You humiliated Claire. You embarrassed all of us. Claire, I hate you. I really do. I hope you're proud of yourself. Then, 5 minutes later, Claire, I didn't mean that. Please just call me. We need to talk. And finally, a single message from Greg. Greg, for what it's worth, I get it. I wouldn't have stayed quiet either. That one made me pause. Not because I forgave him, but because at least he understood. That evening, I went home, turned off the porch light, and ignored the doorbell when it rang at 9:47 p.m. I knew someone would come looking. I didn't care. The truth is, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a coward for staying quiet. I felt solid, like I'd finally shown my daughter that I wasn't just the man in the background of her story. I had a spine, and she'd pushed too far. The fallout was worse than I imagined. The wedding did technically happen, eventually. From what I gathered through mutual friends and a couple of videos posted to social media, before people knew better, Greg stepped in and offered to cover the outstanding balance. Not because he was eager, but because guests were already seated and the embarrassment was escalating fast. But it wasn't enough. Several vendors pulled out anyway, either because they weren't willing to wait on a late wire transfer or because they'd already packed up and left when the hold order went through. The live band never played. The flowers were partially delivered, then picked back up by a confused driver. The food arrived 2 hours late. The power went out once during the reception due to a generator issue that was supposed to be resolved with the upgraded package, one I had canceled. People whispered. Guests left early. And the tension between Claire and Jason? From what I heard, it showed in every photo. I wasn't invited to the redo reception they threw a month later. But that didn't stop Claire from reaching out 2 weeks after the wedding. She asked if we could meet. She wanted to clear the air. I agreed, mostly because I needed closure. We met at a small cafe downtown. She came in late, sunglasses on, hair pulled back in a loose bun. When she sat down, she didn't speak right away. I guess I owe you an apology, she mumbled eventually. I guess. I asked, lifting an eyebrow. She winced. Okay, I do owe you one. I didn't think you'd react like that. You didn't think I'd notice I wasn't mentioned as your father? I asked. Or that I'd care? She stared down at her coffee. He's always been there. And I didn't want to hurt Mom. That made me laugh, just once, bitterly. And me? I don't even rank in that equation. She said nothing. I gave you everything, I continued. And I never asked to be worshipped for it. But on your wedding day, the one moment a father dreams about, you made it clear I was just the guy with a checkbook. Not a dad. I was wrong, she said quietly. I see that now. I studied her face. She looked older somehow, more tired. Maybe the wedding stress had broken through whatever fantasy she'd built. Or maybe it was guilt. I didn't know. I didn't press. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I've started paying Greg back. And you too. This is the first of it. It's not much, but I didn't touch the envelope. Claire, I said, it's not about the money. It never was. You want to write checks? Fine. But what I needed from you was something you didn't give me, and maybe still can't. She blinked fast, like she wasn't expecting that. What do you want me to do? She asked. Beg? Cut Greg out? What would make this okay? Nothing would make it okay, I said softly. Some things you don't get to undo. But you can decide what kind of person you want to be moving forward. She nodded slowly. So that's it. We're just done. No, I said. But I'm done pretending everything's fine when it's not. I'm your father, Claire. I love you. That won't change. But I also need you to love me back. Not just when it's convenient. She didn't say much after that. We paid separately. She hugged me goodbye, but it was a stiff, uncertain hug, the kind people give when they're not sure if they'll ever get another chance. That was 6 months ago. Since then, we've talked maybe 3 times. Surface level stuff. No holidays. No birthdays. Jason sent me a polite thank you note for the initial contribution, even though most of it got reversed. He also mentioned, in careful language, that he and Claire were going to couples therapy. Good. As for me, I finally took that Europe trip I kept putting off. Booked it 2 days after the wedding mess. Spent 3 weeks in Italy, walking through cathedrals, drinking wine in vineyards, and remembering what it felt like to do things for me. I also started volunteering again. Mentorship for kids who aged out of foster care. A few of them remind me of Claire, bright, stubborn, full of potential. But unlike her, they listen. They care. Funny how that works. So yeah, I guess this is my story. Of a wedding that was supposed to be about love, but ended up showing me just how much I'd let myself be forgotten. Of a daughter I'd give everything to, but who didn't realize that everything includes respect. And of a father who finally stood up, not for revenge, but for dignity. Because sometimes, the biggest moment of your life isn't walking someone down the aisle. It's walking away. You ever feel like your family doesn't see you until you become a problem? Like you're invisible right up until the moment you say no? That's been my life for as long as I can remember, and I used to just take it, go along to get along, keep my head down, and try not to cause a stir. But when my grandpa passed away and left me his cabin, something in me snapped. Because that was the moment I realized my family wasn't just inconsiderate or forgetful. No, they saw me as a placeholder. Someone they could step over, walk past, or hand off without asking. I'm 29 now. My name's Josh. And what started with my mom handing over a set of keys like she was passing out candy turned into a courtroom drama that flipped my entire world upside down. Let me back up a little. I grew up in Michigan, the youngest of three. I've got an older brother named Cole and a sister named Ashley. My parents split when I was in middle school, and we mostly lived with my mom after that. She was one of those women who seemed to thrive in chaos, always juggling bills, jobs, and obligations, always exhausted, always making sure everyone knew just how much she was sacrificing. Cole left for college and never looked back, and Ashley, well, Ashley stayed close. Close to mom, close to the drama, close to whatever benefits she could milk out of a situation. She was the golden child, always getting the extra slice of cake, the nicer room, the praise. I was the quiet one, the good kid, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who got overlooked. But I had one person who saw me. My grandpa. He was my mom's dad, a retired electrician who had this quiet way about him, stoic, dry-humored, but deeply observant. The kind of man who didn't talk much, but when he did, you listened. He had this small cabin up north, near Crystal Lake, surrounded by woods and silence and peace. We used to spend whole weekends up there when I was a kid, just me and him, fishing off the dock, fixing up the shed, chopping wood, and sitting on the porch sipping cocoa in silence. It was the only place that ever felt still, like I could breathe. I didn't find out until after his funeral that he left the cabin to me. Not to the family, not to all three of us, just me. A handwritten letter was tucked into his will, addressed to me. It was short, just a few lines, but I read it 100 times. This place gave me peace. You always appreciated it the most. Take care of it. Make it yours. Grandpa. I didn't cry at the funeral, but I cried reading that. The cabin was old, but sturdy. I'd been up there recently helping him winterize it the past 2 years, so I knew it was in decent shape. My plan was to keep it simple, fix it up over time, use it as a weekend retreat, maybe even an Airbnb down the line. Something quiet and stable. Something mine. But that's not how my mom saw it. About a week after the will was read, I got a text from her. Just casual, like she was asking if I wanted Chinese for dinner. Gave Ash the keys to the cabin. Figured she can get started moving in. Hope that's okay. I read it 3 times before I even reacted. I wasn't sure if I was hallucinating or if it was a joke. Moving in. Keys. Hope that's okay. I hadn't given her the keys. I hadn't given anyone permission. I hadn't even gone up there yet. I was still trying to process the fact that it was mine. So I called her. And I swear, her tone was like I was being dramatic for asking. "Oh, Josh, don't be so sensitive," she said, brushing it off. "Ashley's going through a lot right now with the divorce, and she just needs a place to land. It's not like she's taking it from you. It's family. We share." No, that's not how this works. That cabin wasn't some random sofa bed in a spare room. It wasn't a gift bag to hand out at a pity party. It was part of my inheritance, my grandpa's legacy, something he specifically left to me, not to be loaned out like a library book because Ashley needed to land somewhere. I told Mom I didn't give permission and I wanted Ashley out. She paused for half a second and then said, "Josh, she's already there." Already there. That was the moment everything started to change in my head. That phrase rang in my ears for the rest of the night, like an alarm bell I couldn't turn off. Already there. I didn't even know how she got the keys. Turns out Grandpa had left an extra set in his kitchen drawer that my mom apparently felt entitled to rummage through after the funeral. And Ashley? She didn't text me. Didn't ask. Didn't check in. Just packed her stuff, drove up, and let herself in like it was her birthright. At first, I tried to handle it calmly. I texted Ashley and said we needed to talk. She hit me back with a thumbs up and then nothing for 2 days. Finally, she called, sounding like she was calling to cancel a dentist appointment. "Yeah, I saw your text," she said. "Look, it's not a big deal. I'm only staying until I figure stuff out. You weren't using it." I hadn't even been up there yet, I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Exactly," she replied, like that proved her point. I started to get that tight feeling in my chest, the kind where you know if you speak again, you might say something you can't take back. So I said, "I'm coming up this weekend. We'll talk then." She gave me a non-committal sure and hung up. I drove up that Saturday, still holding out hope that maybe it wasn't as bad as it sounded. Maybe she just brought a few things. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe she was sleeping on a couch and keeping the place tidy. Nope. I pulled up to the driveway, and my stomach dropped. Ashley had moved in. Like, full on. Her SUV was in the driveway. There were potted plants on the porch. She'd painted the front door blue. There was a wind chime. A wind chime. There were kids' toys in the yard. Her sons. Her ex had taken off 6 months ago and left her with a 5-year-old and a pile of debt. That sucks. I sympathize. But that doesn't give her the right to steal my inheritance. When I knocked on the door, she answered in sweatpants and a hoodie, holding a coffee mug and looking like she'd just finished watching an episode of Fixer Upper. Hey, she said, like I was some buddy from college dropping by to hang out. Want to come in? I made cinnamon rolls. I didn't even move. You painted the door? I asked. She glanced behind her like she'd forgotten. Oh yeah? It was looking a little faded. I figured you wouldn't mind. I minded. I walked in, and the place looked like she'd been there for months. Rugs. Curtains. Her son's drawings on the fridge. Half the furniture had been replaced. My grandpa's old leather armchair, the one he used to nap in, was gone. I couldn't even see it anywhere. She'd replaced it with some IKEA beanbag chair monstrosity. I asked where it went. Oh, it was all scratched up, she said. Probably had mice. I donated it. That was the moment the final piece clicked into place. She didn't think she was borrowing the cabin. She thought it was hers. And that's when I knew this wasn't going to be a casual family disagreement. This was going to be war. I barely slept the night after I saw what Ashley had done to the cabin. I crashed in a cheap motel 5 miles away, pacing the floor while staring at the ceiling fan like it might offer some kind of answer. Part of me wanted to storm back over there and drag her out by the roots of her overgrown entitlement. But the other part, the one that still clung to the scraps of family loyalty, told me to think, to plan, to not burn the whole forest down just yet. I decided I'd try one more conversation. I drove back the next morning. Her SUV was still there, naturally. A new addition had joined the porch overnight, a little welcome mat that said "Home Sweet Home." I wanted to rip it in half with my teeth. Ashley opened the door, sipping the same coffee mug, like nothing about this situation was even remotely off. "Josh, you're back," she said, sounding fake surprised. "Didn't expect you this early." I stood on the threshold, not stepping in this time. "I want my cabin back," I said flatly. Her smile tightened like she was bracing for an incoming tide. "We talked about this." "No, you talked." I didn't agree to anything. She leaned on the doorframe, her voice shifting into that syrupy condescension she always used when she wanted to act superior. "Josh, you don't need it. You live in the city. You've got your apartment, your job, your whole quiet life thing going on. This place would have just sat empty. I'm using it. I'm giving it life." I felt my jaw tighten. "That's not your decision." She raised her eyebrows like I was being unreasonable. "Mom said you'd be like this." Oh, there it was. I should have seen it sooner. The whole thing stunk of Mom's fingerprints. Ashley didn't have the guts to pull this kind of power play on her own. She'd always needed an enabler. And my mother? She'd been an Olympic-level gaslighter for as long as I could remember. Did she now? I said, forcing my tone to stay even. Ashley folded her arms. "She said you'd act like you're the only one who ever cared about Grandpa, but we all loved him. Just because he left your name on a piece of paper doesn't mean the rest of us don't matter." And there it was, the unspoken truth, finally spoken. That ugly, simmering resentment that had always lived beneath Ashley's surface. She'd always hated that Grandpa and I were close. He was the only adult in our family who never catered to her drama, and she never forgave him for it. I didn't respond. I just turned and walked away. Later that day, I called my mom. She answered on the third ring, and I could already hear the performative sigh in her voice. "Josh, honey, I'm exhausted. Can we make this quick? I want to talk about the cabin." Silence. Then, "Oh, for heaven's sake. Are you still mad about that?" She moved in. She threw out Grandpa's chair. She painted the door. She's talking like it's hers. Well, maybe if you'd made it clear what you were doing with it, we wouldn't have had to make a judgment call. Josh, she said, using that sharp tone she always used when she wanted to shut something down. "You're not being fair. Ashley is going through a lot. You've always had it easier. No kids, no divorce, no financial stress. You live in your own little bubble, and it's time you started being a little more generous." I could feel something twist in my gut. You gave away something that wasn't yours, I said quietly. Grandpa left that cabin to me. In writing. He chose me. And he was old, Josh. His mind wasn't what it used to be. He probably thought you'd be the responsible one. That doesn't mean you should hoard it like some kind of dragon. Don't do that, I snapped. Don't twist this. I'm not twisting anything, she said, voice sharp now. I'm protecting my daughter. Your sister, who has a child, who needed a home. There it was. The hierarchy. The unspoken family rule, Ashley first. Josh last. I didn't even respond. I just hung up. That week, I called a lawyer. I needed to know exactly what my rights were and how fast I could get my sister out. The attorney, an older guy named Mr. Bearden, was calm and methodical. He reviewed the will, the title deed, and everything Grandpa had filed. It's crystal clear, he said. Your grandfather left the property to you exclusively. No trust, no joint ownership, no transfer on death clause. You own it outright. So if I wanted to have her evicted, she's a squatter, he said. Even if she's family, she has no legal right to be there. But I recommend a formal notice. We do this by the book. I felt like I could breathe again. I sent the notice via certified mail. Gave Ashley 30 days to vacate. Attached a copy of the will, the deed, everything. She didn't respond. Just posted a picture of her kid on the cabin porch on Instagram with the caption, "Fresh start." A week later, I went up to the cabin again. Her SUV was gone, and I hoped, maybe she'd taken the hint. But when I walked in, I realized the SUV wasn't gone. It had just been replaced by a moving truck. She was in the living room with a man I didn't recognize, assembling what looked like a massive entertainment center. Oh hey, she said, like I was just the pizza guy showing up uninvited. You're early. Thought you weren't coming till next weekend. What is this? I asked. She looked at the guy, then back at me, laughing lightly. Oh, this is Nate. He's helping me get set up. Set up for what exactly? She blinked. Living here. I gave you a formal notice. Yeah, and I ignored it, she said with a shrug, like I'd just handed her a party invite she couldn't be bothered to RSVP to. Nate looked confused. Wait, is this your? I own this place, I said to him, voice louder than I intended. Ashley frowned. Josh, don't make a scene. You are trespassing. She rolled her eyes. It's not that serious. I stood there, chest tight, staring at the walls that had once held my grandfather's tools, his photos, his memories, and now they were covered in Ashley's nonsense. Vision boards, dream catchers, LED lights, a big canvas painting of some dumb quote. Let it be. I walked out. 2 days later, she posted on Facebook. A long, sobbing rant about how she'd been betrayed by her own brother, how she was just trying to give her son stability, and how some people care more about property than people. The comments flooded in. Her friends, distant cousins, even some of our relatives. How could he kick you out? What a selfish move. You deserve that cabin more than anyone. One even said, your brother sounds like a psychopath. I didn't respond. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I stayed quiet. For 2 weeks. Then I got a letter in the mail from her lawyer. Her lawyer. She was suing me for emotional damages and implied tenancy, claiming she had a verbal agreement with our mother and that she'd invested emotionally and financially in the property and therefore deserved occupational rights or a share of equity. I nearly blacked out from rage reading it. That was the breaking point. That was when I knew we weren't just having a family fight anymore. This wasn't about grief or miscommunication. This was about entitlement. About someone who thought they could rewrite reality and bully me into giving up what was mine. And Mom, she didn't just support Ashley. She wrote a statement for her case. Claimed in writing that Grandpa had always meant for the cabin to be shared, and that I was twisting his legacy for personal gain. That's when I felt the final string snap. I wasn't invisible anymore. Now I was the enemy, and I was done playing nice. The next step? Court. And what I discovered during that trial, let's just say it changed everything. There's a strange sort of silence that follows betrayal, one that doesn't come with slammed doors or screaming matches. It's just this dead quiet in your chest. A cold stillness. Like everything inside you has frozen for a second because your brain can't keep up with what just happened. That's how I felt reading my own mother's statement against me. Her words were printed neatly in black ink on legal paper, filed in court, signed and sworn. There was no metaphor left. No gray area. She had picked a side, and it wasn't mine. That was the fall. I hit rock bottom in ways I didn't expect. Not just financially. I had savings, and the lawyer fees were manageable. But emotionally, I felt like a ghost in my own life. Like I'd become the villain in a story I didn't even write. Family members stopped returning my calls. A few unfollowed me on social media, which I wouldn't have cared about if they hadn't liked and commented on Ashley's pity parade the week before. I got texts from cousins I hadn't heard from in years, saying things like, "You should have just let her stay a while," and "It's not like you need the place." One even asked, "Why would you take a single mom to court?" I didn't respond to that one. I didn't respond to any of them. I stopped opening social media altogether. I deleted the apps from my phone. I stopped answering most calls. The only people I spoke to regularly were Mr. Bearden, my lawyer, and my coworker Sarah, who noticed something was off and kept gently checking in. I gave her the bare minimum of the situation, and she never pushed. She just invited me to lunch once a week and sent dumb memes to keep me grounded. Still, there were nights I'd sit alone in my apartment and question everything. Was I overreacting? Was I the bad guy? Was I really that cold? That selfish? But then I'd pull out Grandpa's letter. The real one. The one in his handwriting. "This place gave me peace. You always appreciated it the most. Take care of it. Make it yours." And I'd remember, no, this wasn't about greed. It wasn't about denying my sister a home. It was about respect, boundaries, legacy. He trusted me with something, and they were treating it like a spare room in a hotel. So I kept going. Quietly, slowly, privately. The first real step in my climb back up came from something small. I found Grandpa's old toolbox in my closet. The one he gave me 2 years ago when he stopped driving up to the cabin himself. It was full of rusted sockets and a broken headlamp, but the sight of it, it grounded me. It reminded me that I had roots deeper than this mess. That I came from someone steady, someone honest. That weekend, I didn't drive to the courthouse. I didn't stew in my apartment. I drove up north to a different lake, nowhere near the cabin, and rented a cheap Airbnb for 2 nights. No Wi-Fi, no TV, just trees, a cold breeze, and a notebook. I started writing things down, not just the court stuff. Everything. How I felt, what I wanted, who I trusted, what kind of man I wanted to be when this ended, because it would end. Those 2 days were the first I'd felt like myself in months. I started doing it every few weeks, disconnecting completely, taking little trips. Nothing fancy, just somewhere quiet. I started running again, too. Not for speed, but for rhythm, for breath. I'd wake up early, put on some worn-out sneakers, and run 3 miles around my neighborhood until the thoughts in my head stopped clashing long enough to let me breathe. Work helped, too. I'm a graphic designer, freelance mostly, and I'd let a few clients go during the worst of the chaos. But now, I picked up a new project. One that had nothing to do with cabins or courtrooms. It was a branding package for a small coffee shop opening upstate. The owner, a woman named Elena, was kind and easy to work with. She liked my first concept so much she asked me if I wanted to do the mural inside the shop, too. I almost said no, but something in me said, why not? So I drove up there, walked into the empty shop with paint cans and brushes, and spent 2 days painting a massive, colorful mural of wildflowers bursting out of a coffee cup. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And when I stepped back to look at it, I felt something strange. Pride. Not the angry kind. Not the ego kind. The quiet kind. The kind that says, I'm still here. Back in court, things were moving slowly, but they were moving. Mr. Bearden kept me updated. Ashley's lawyer was trying everything. Emotional arguments. Verbal contracts. Even a vague accusation that I'd intimidated her on the porch, which was laughable considering the only witnesses were her handyman and a raccoon. But none of it was sticking. Bearden was sharp. Focused. He filed motions, gathered evidence, stayed calm while Ashley's side tried to drag us into emotional mud. We got access to some of Ashley's messages and photos through Discovery, and let me tell you, those told a different story. Screenshots of her texts to friends saying, he won't fight me. He's too soft. Pictures of her posing in the cabin with captions like, manifesting this place for me and Logan. One even said, it's basically mine. Mom says he won't do anything. That one stung, but it also helped. Meanwhile, my mom stayed quiet. At least publicly. She didn't call, didn't message, didn't check in once. And that silence, somehow, hurt worse than the letter. I remembered birthdays she'd forgotten. School recitals she skipped. Times I got sick and she sent Ashley to check on me instead of coming herself. I remembered her calling me overdramatic at 13 when I cried after my pet dog died, telling me, boys don't act like that. I remembered her giving Ashley the last slice of cake at Grandpa's 80th, even though he'd told me to save it. These memories didn't flood in all at once. They came like waves. Small, then bigger, then crashing. And one night, sitting alone in my apartment with a bowl of cold rice, it hit me. She'd always chosen Ashley. Not just in this. Not just with the cabin. Always. And that realization? It didn't destroy me. It freed me. Because for the first time in my life, I stopped hoping for her approval. I stopped waiting for her to apologize. I stopped needing her to change. Instead, I changed me. I moved to a new apartment. Smaller, quieter, cheaper. One with better light, and a little nook where I set up a reading chair. I started journaling regularly. I finally booked that therapy session Sarah had nudged me toward. I didn't unload everything in the first session, but I talked about Grandpa, about the cabin, about feeling unseen. The therapist, Marcus, just listened, asked simple questions, let the silences hang without rushing to fill them. At one point, I told him, I think I used to believe if I was just good enough, they'd treat me better. And he said, what if you were already good enough, and they just weren't capable of seeing it? That one stuck with me for weeks. By the time the trial date was officially scheduled, I was ready. Not just legally, but emotionally. Ashley didn't scare me anymore. Neither did my mom. They weren't some towering force I had to dodge or please. They were just people. People who made choices. And I had the right to make mine. Still, I won't pretend I wasn't nervous. The night before the trial, I barely slept. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, picturing the courtroom, the judge, Ashley's smug expression. I imagined my mom walking in and sitting behind her. I imagined myself stuttering, fumbling, looking small. But I also imagined Grandpa, sitting in that old leather chair, watching, and I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I put on a navy suit. Nothing flashy, just clean, professional. I packed the original copy of Grandpa's letter in a folder, just in case. I ate a real breakfast, drove to the courthouse early, sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from floating away. Then I walked inside. Ashley was already there. She looked different, maybe more tired, maybe more polished. I couldn't tell. She didn't look at me. Her lawyer, some slick guy in his 40s with too much hair gel, kept glancing over like he was sizing me up. My mom wasn't in the room. Not yet. Then, just before the judge walked in, the door opened, and my stomach dropped, because she did show up. And not alone. She was holding something. And when I realized what it was, my skin went cold. She was carrying a box labeled Grandpa's personal files. She carried it like it was nothing. A cardboard file box with duct tape along the sides and Grandpa's name scrawled in fading black marker. J.R. Thomas, personal. I hadn't seen that handwriting in over a year, but the sight of it made my heart stop mid-beat. My mom didn't look at me as she walked in. Just beelined for Ashley and her lawyer, set the box beside them, and sat down behind their table like she was exactly where she belonged. Part of their team. No hesitation. No shame. Mr. Bearden, seated next to me, leaned over and muttered, that box wasn't in discovery. I nodded stiffly. My stomach had turned to ice. They were playing something. I didn't know what yet, but I knew this wasn't a spontaneous act of conscience. My mother didn't do spontaneous, and she definitely didn't do helpful. The judge entered moments later, and the trial began. Nothing dramatic at first. The opening arguments were short. Bearden's was steady and logical. My grandfather left the cabin to me. Ashley had no legal right to move in. She'd refused a formal notice to vacate. We weren't arguing emotions. We were arguing property law, and the law was clear. Ashley's lawyer tried to paint a different picture. Hardship, family misunderstanding, an informal verbal agreement based on years of trust. He even used the phrase moral ownership, which almost made me laugh out loud. He spoke like we were in a therapy session, not a courtroom. And when he motioned toward the box and said, we have further documentation of the family's understanding of Mr. Thomas's intentions, I felt Bearden's shoulder tense next to me. The judge glanced at the box, but didn't touch it yet. Instead, he nodded and said, we'll review exhibits after the initial testimonies. So, that's how we started. They called Ashley first. She took the stand in a beige sweater, minimal makeup, and her hair in a loose braid. She looked soft, vulnerable. I knew it was intentional. She gave her answers in a calm, slightly breathy voice, pausing often as if reliving trauma. Her lawyer walked her through the expected narrative. How her divorce had left her and her son with nowhere to go. How our mother had assured her it was fine to stay at the cabin. How she'd invested time and money into improving the place. How I hadn't expressed any desire to use it, and how she believed, genuinely, that it was a shared family property. Bearden didn't interrupt much, just took notes. He only asked 2 questions during cross: whether she ever paid property taxes on the cabin, she hadn't, and whether she had ever communicated with me about the arrangement in writing before she moved in, she hadn't. Her answers were quiet, but the damage was done. The courtroom was not swayed by tears or assumptions. It wanted receipts. Next came my turn. I won't pretend I wasn't nervous, but something had shifted in me. The more I spoke, the steadier I felt. I explained everything from the beginning. The relationship I had with my grandfather, the letter he left me, the will, the shock of finding Ashley already moved in. I didn't embellish or lash out. I let the facts speak. When I mentioned the chair she'd thrown out, the one Grandpa always sat in, my voice caught for a second, and I saw the judge glance up. I don't know what he was thinking, but I knew he heard it. The weight of it. The loss beneath the conflict. Bearden's final question to me was simple. Josh, what does the cabin represent to you? I paused, not for effect, but because the answer came from somewhere deep. It's peace, I said. It's the one place I ever felt like I mattered. My grandfather gave it to me because he knew I needed it, and because I respected it. I never saw it as a trophy or a handout. I saw it as a responsibility. The room went still. Then it was Mom's turn. She wasn't called to the stand immediately. First, Ashley's lawyer introduced the contents of the box. They claimed it contained informal correspondences, personal notes, and property-related documents that support Ms. Thomas's belief that the cabin was intended as shared. The judge allowed the submission, and the bailiff carried the box over. I watched with clenched teeth as papers were sorted and a few selected items handed to the court clerk. Ashley's lawyer then motioned to call their final witness, my mother. She walked up slowly, every movement calculated. I couldn't tell if she was nervous or simply playing the role of the neutral matriarch. Her expression was mild. Her eyes didn't once meet mine. She swore her oath, took the seat, and folded her hands neatly in her lap. Her lawyer began. Ma'am, can you describe your understanding of your father's wishes regarding the Crystal Lake cabin? She gave a soft sigh, like she'd been holding this in for years. My father was a very private man. He didn't always explain things clearly, especially when it came to paperwork. But he often spoke to me, as his daughter, about wanting the cabin to stay in the family. He didn't believe in favoritism. He just wanted it cared for. And did he ever suggest that Josh should be the sole owner? She tilted her head slightly. Not to me. In fact, he expressed concern about isolating one child over the others. He told me multiple times he hoped the cabin would be a shared refuge for all the grandchildren. Her voice was syrupy smooth. Practiced. Ashley's lawyer then produced a handwritten note from the box. Is this your father's handwriting? She glanced at it and nodded. Yes. And what does it say? She read aloud. Whoever has the cabin must remember it's not just a house. It's a legacy. It's for everyone who finds peace there. Ashley's lawyer beamed. No further questions. Bearden stood slowly. Ms. Thomas, he began. Did you have access to your father's files before or after his death? I helped organize them after the funeral. Were you the executor of his will? No. So you weren't authorized to handle or distribute property documents? I was simply trying to help. And yet you provided your daughter with keys to the cabin? I believed she had every right to be there. He nodded. Was that belief based on legal advice or emotional preference? She stiffened. It was based on what I knew of my father's wishes. Even though those wishes were clearly documented in a legal will naming only Josh as the beneficiary? Silence. He leaned forward, voice calm. Miss Thomas, did you ever tell Josh you were giving Ashley the keys? I texted him after. After. So not before. Not with his consent. She hesitated. It was an emergency. Ashley had nowhere else to go. So you made an executive decision regarding property that wasn't yours. And now you're attempting to validate that decision retroactively. Is that correct? I was trying to keep the family together. Bearden nodded, then pulled something from his folder. A copy of Grandpa's letter. One last question. This letter, in your father's handwriting, left with the will, Does it contradict anything you've said today? She blinked, reading it. No, but thank you. No further questions. She was dismissed. And that was when everything changed. After the judge called for a short recess, Bearden pulled me aside. She slipped, he said. What do you mean? She admitted she was an executor, that she handled private documents after death without permission. That's a problem for their side, more than they realize. But she didn't lie about the note. She didn't have to, he said. Because that note? We're going to use it. Not the way they think. Back in the courtroom, Bearden submitted a motion to cross-examine the full contents of the file box. Since it had been entered as an exhibit, the judge approved it. And here's where the setup truly began. Bearden went through each document with a fine-tooth comb. Most were inconsequential, old water bills, property maps, repair estimates. But then he found something they must not have noticed or thought irrelevant. An insurance policy update from 3 years ago. One that named me, and only me, as the cabin's sole listed resident in the event of structural damage. Bearden smiled. Why would your grandfather list you as the sole policyholder 3 years before his death if he intended the cabin to be shared? He asked aloud. Ashley's lawyer fumbled for a response, but the judge held up a hand. Let's proceed, he said. And I'd like to hear more about this document. Bearden whispered to me later. That alone could destroy their emotional argument. But we're not done. Over the next 2 days, Bearden quietly laid the groundwork. He called the notary who witnessed Grandpa's will. He brought in the cabin's former property manager, who testified that I was the only one who ever visited or maintained it. He even pulled banking records that showed Ashley hadn't spent a dime on repairs, contrary to her testimony. Piece by piece, the house of cards came down. And then, Bearden made one final, subtle move. He hinted to the court that a countersuit could be filed for trespassing, damage to private property, and fraudulent misrepresentation, all stemming from the unauthorized occupation of the cabin. Ashley's face paled. Even her lawyer looked uneasy. But Bearden didn't file it. Not yet. He was waiting, watching, setting the trap. Because now we had leverage. And leverage meant power. The courtroom smelled like dry paper and weak coffee. The kind of place where stories go to die unless someone fights to keep them alive. I'd sat through 3 full days of testimony, slow building tension, and smug side glances from Ashley and my mother. But today, day 4, was different. Today, the trap would snap shut. It started quietly. Bearden requested permission to introduce one final exhibit, an affidavit signed by the notary who witnessed Grandpa's will. The judge nodded, and Bearden handed over the document like it was nothing special. But it was. Because in that affidavit, the notary stated under oath that not only had Grandpa clearly indicated that the cabin was to go solely to me, but that he specifically mentioned not wanting Ashley or my mother to meddle with it. The exact quote, "My grandson Josh is the only one who never took from me. The cabin is his. Tell the others not to touch it. They'll twist it into something it's not." When the judge read that line aloud, the silence in the courtroom shifted. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just stared at the page. Ashley's lawyer leaned over and whispered something frantically into her ear. She blinked, looked toward our mother. Mom's lips were pressed so tight they were almost white. Then Bearden stood up slowly and asked to proceed with our final motion. This was the part they never saw coming. Because while they had been so busy trying to take the cabin, we'd quietly been documenting the damage they'd caused. Bearden laid it all out. Ashley had replaced structural elements of the cabin without a permit or licensed contractor. She'd sold or thrown away multiple heirlooms, including Grandpa's chair and an antique fishing rod set, valued at $2,000 in the estate inventory. Her son had left permanent marker drawings on the pinewood wall in the guest room. She posted about it on Instagram, captioned, "Oops. Too cute to be mad, grinning face with sweat." She had painted, drilled, mounted, and disposed of property, all without my consent. We had the receipts, the photos, the appraisals, the social media posts, all collected, time-stamped, and packaged neatly in a folder labeled Unauthorized Alterations. Bearden took his time, laying it out piece by piece while Ashley's lawyer turned a deep shade of red. And then, the final blow. We are requesting full reimbursement of repair and restoration costs totaling $18,450.72, along with punitive damages for unlawful occupation and emotional distress. The emotional distress was modest. We weren't aiming high. But the symbolism? Devastating. Ashley's lawyer tried to object. He claimed the figure was exaggerated, that her son's drawings were easily painted over, that she didn't understand the rules. But Bearden remained calm. She chose to move in without consent, he said. She chose to alter the property. She chose to ignore a formal eviction notice. These were not accidents. They were decisions. Then he turned to the judge. And as for Ms. Thomas, the defendant's mother, she accessed confidential property records without authorization and handed over property keys. While we are not pursuing damages from her directly, we asked that her actions be noted for the record. My mom flinched. That was the first time she looked at me in days. I didn't look back. The judge called a brief recess to review the documents. When he returned, his face was unreadable. He spoke slowly, deliberately. It is clear from the evidence presented that the Crystal Lake cabin was bequeathed solely to the plaintiff, Josh Thomas. The will is unambiguous. Furthermore, the letter of intent, notary affidavit, and insurance documentation confirm that the deceased intended this property to be kept under exclusive ownership. Ashley sank deeper in her chair. The judge continued. Ms. Ashley Thomas unlawfully occupied this property, refused to vacate after being notified, and performed unauthorized modifications that resulted in measurable damages. He adjusted his glasses and paused for effect. I hereby rule in favor of the plaintiff. Ms. Thomas is ordered to vacate the property immediately, pay $18,450.72 in damages, and submit a formal apology to be filed with the court for unauthorized occupation. Ashley's mouth fell open. An apology? The judge looked at her flatly. Yes, Ms. Thomas. A written acknowledgement of your unlawful conduct is the least you can offer. Then he turned to my mother. And while Ms. Joanne Thomas is not the legal party in this case, I am entering into the record a formal rebuke of her involvement. Accessing estate records and distributing property access without legal authority is not just inappropriate, it is unethical. My mother's face was stone, but her hands gripped the edge of the bench like she needed it to stay upright. Court adjourned. I stood up slowly as Bearden packed up his papers. Ashley didn't say a word. She grabbed her purse, ignored the apology order like it was a joke, and stormed out. My mom followed her, fast and stiff, not once looking back at me. I didn't follow. I didn't chase. Bearden looked at me and smiled slightly. You did good, Josh. I didn't win $1 million, I said. No, he said, but you defended yourself. You honored the man who trusted you. And that's worth more. I gave Ashley 2 weeks to move out. She tried to drag it to the deadline, but I had someone on site to supervise. She wasn't allowed to remove anything that wasn't hers. She tried to claim the new couch and coffee table until we showed her the receipts were under her name. They stayed. I had them donated the next day. The potted plants? Gone. The blue paint on the door? Repainted the original shade of pine green. The wind chime? I smashed it myself. 1 week later, I went back to the cabin. Alone. Just like I had when I was a kid. I brought a cooler, a folding chair, and Grandpa's toolbox. I sat on the porch for a long time, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. There was no drama. No yelling. No tension. Just silence. Just peace. I did eventually get the apology, months later, in a short, typed letter full of legal jargon and zero remorse. But I didn't need it, because the real apology wasn't words. It was the empty porch, the returned keys, the locked door. My mother never reached out, not even a passive-aggressive text. I think, in some twisted way, she still believes she was doing the right thing, that she was keeping the family together. But the truth is, you can't protect family by destroying someone else's sense of self. You either see the people in front of you, or you don't. And she never saw me. But Grandpa did. And that's why this cabin is mine. That's why I painted his name above the fireplace in small, hand-carved letters. J.R. Thomas, Peacekeeper. It's not for Airbnb anymore. It's not for the family. It's not for Ashley. It's for me. Because sometimes, revenge isn't about fireworks or screaming matches. Sometimes, it's just about sitting on a porch you earned, sipping coffee from your own mug, and listening to the wind that no one else can take away from you. And that's exactly what I did. I'm Ian, 26 years old, and if I had to sum up my relationship with my family in one word, it'd be tolerated. Not loved, not respected, just tolerated. I used to think it was me, that I was too sensitive, too different, too much. But over the years, I started noticing a pattern. Every time something good happened in my life, my parents found a way to make it feel like a fluke. Every mistake, proof I was a failure. Every success, a fluke or someone else's doing. My younger sister, Elise, on the other hand, she could do no wrong. The golden child. Even when she messed up, they'd twist themselves into pretzels trying to defend her. I remember once she crashed my dad's car while texting. His words? "It's just a car. Don't be so dramatic." 2 weeks earlier, I'd left the garage door open by mistake and got a 30-minute lecture about responsibility and how hard he worked for everything. That's the kind of family dynamic I was dealing with. Growing up in that environment shaped me in ways I'm only beginning to unravel. I became quieter, more observant. I stopped sharing things. When I got into college on a scholarship, my mom's reaction was, "Wow, guess they're not as competitive as they used to be." When I landed my first real job in film editing, my dad muttered, "So, you're playing with movie clips for a living now?" Meanwhile, Elise started dating some guy named Carson, a trust fund baby with a jawline and no spine. My parents adored him, of course. Every family dinner turned into a showcase of their perfect relationship. I'd sit quietly, fork pushing cold mashed potatoes, while my mom gushed about Elise's wedding plans as if I didn't exist. Still, I was invited to the wedding. Kind of. The invitation had been addressed to Ian and guest, even though they knew I was single. That little detail felt intentional. I RSVP'd yes, though. I had my reasons. The ceremony was set to take place at this expensive vineyard upstate, the kind of place where everything smells faintly of overpriced roses and everyone pretends to know the difference between Cabernet and Merlot. When I arrived, one of the ushers handed me a name card and said, "You're at table 19. I didn't think anything of it until I walked into the reception hall and realized table 19 was shoved into a corner next to the speaker system and filled with actual kids. Not teenagers, kids. One of them was coloring on the tablecloth. Another was making a fort out of bread rolls. That's when I felt it. The old heat behind my ears. That flush of humiliation I thought I'd grown out of. I turned around and saw my dad across the room, drink in hand, whispering something to my uncle. They both looked over. My dad gave me that tight, insincere smile, then casually made his way over like he hadn't just orchestrated another public jab at my expense. "Try not to ruin this," he said under his breath, leaning close. "Like you ruin everything else." My uncle chuckled behind him. My mom caught my eye, then looked away. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, because I knew something they didn't. You see, over the past few months, while Elise had been obsessing over flower arrangements and guest lists, she'd also hired me to put together her wedding video. Not the official one. They'd paid some artsy couple from Brooklyn $5,000 for that. No, she wanted a side project. A slideshow. One that would play during the toasts. Just something fun, she'd said. Cute clips of us growing up. Family memories. Some videos from college. You know, I played the part. Of course, I said. I'd love to, and I got to work. But not the way they thought. I spent weeks digging through old home videos, scanning Elise's Instagram reels, pulling footage from family phones I'd backed up over the years. At first, it was just for the slideshow. But the more I watched, the more patterns emerged. My parents' favoritism. Elise's casual cruelty. The constant put-downs. The snide remarks. Moments I'd forgotten, caught on camera like time capsules of pain. I started stitching them together. Not all of them, just enough. Subtle at first. A comment here. A clip there. And then, the kicker. A short clip Elise didn't realize I had. One from her bachelorette party. It was late, they were drunk, and Elise was sitting on the balcony with a glass of something pink in her hand. She was laughing. "I mean, it's not like I love Carson, love him," she slurred. "But he's loaded, and I've earned it after dealing with my messed up family for years. Especially Ian. God, what a martyr. He's like a side character in a movie no one wants to finish." I almost deleted it. Almost. But I didn't. I edited everything into a 7-minute video. Opened with baby photos, sweet piano music, childhood laughter. Then slowly, subtly, the tone shifted. The clips got less curated. More real. Voices sharper. Laughter more forced. Snide comments slipped in. My dad mocking my career. My mom saying Elise was the only one worth bragging about. Elise calling me the family ghost. And finally, the balcony confession. I timed it perfectly to drop right after the champagne toast, when everyone would be watching, relaxed, sentimental. I tested the timing again and again until it felt like a punch you don't see coming. And now, sitting at the kids' table, I pulled out my phone and gave a little nod to the AV guy in the corner. He was a friend from college, another video nerd, as my dad used to say. I'd slipped him a flash drive earlier and told him exactly when to cue it. The lights dimmed. Elise, standing next to Carson with her arms around him, raised her glass and said, "Thank you all for being here today. I couldn't have asked for a more perfect family, a more perfect husband, or a more perfect day." Everyone clapped. The projector flickered to life. The music started. Soft, nostalgic. And I sat back in my chair, a smile tugging at my lips, as the first image filled the screen. It started with innocent clips. Baby Elise in her high chair, cake smeared on her face while our mom laughed behind the camera. Elise at 5, dressed as a fairy princess, waving a glittery wand. Me, in the background, dressed as a cardboard robot. Everyone laughed at that one. I could feel the warmth ripple through the room, the kind of easy joy families cling to. They had no idea. Then came the school years. Elise holding up a trophy. Elise at a dance. Elise in graduation robes. In each clip, my parents were cheering, clapping, swarming her with praise. And just when the room was settling into that feel-good, champagne-drenched nostalgia, the tone shifted. Not the visuals, not yet, but the music. It slowed. Just a beat. Then dipped an octave. Now came the clips I'd inserted with surgical precision. Me at the same school events, standing off to the side, clapping quietly, barely acknowledged. The audio from one video cracked faintly as my dad said, "Don't zoom in on him. Focus on Elise." My aunt's voice followed. "Ian always looks like he's about to cry." Laughter. On the screen, I blinked, trying to smile. The room grew quieter. A few people glanced around. I could feel eyes start to shift toward the head table. But it wasn't overt yet. It was still deniable, still subtle, until it wasn't. The clip cut to my college graduation. I was on stage, shaking hands, in full cap and gown. My name was called. The camera zoomed in, but no cheers. No clapping. Just a hushed voice, my dad's, saying, "Finally. Now let's hope he gets a job and moves out." The video paused on my face as I walked off stage, alone, the applause in the background distant and polite. I saw my mom sit straighter in her seat. The next few clips landed like gut punches. Elise laughing as she opened an envelope filled with cash for her birthday. "They didn't give Ian anything last year," she said casually to the camera. Said he was too old for gifts. Then a sharp cut to a Christmas morning. My dad handing Elise a car key, her squealing, while I watched from the couch in silence. The camera panned past me like I wasn't even there. By now, the room was dead quiet. You could hear silverware hitting plates. The kids at my table stopped playing. I turned slightly, just enough to see my uncle lean forward, whispering urgently to my dad. My dad's face was darkening. My mom pressed a napkin to her lips. Elise. Elise wasn't smiling anymore. And then came the balcony video. It started with wind and laughter. The camera was shaky. Clearly someone else had filmed it, but I cut out everything else. Just left in the part that mattered. Elise's voice, slightly slurred. "I mean, it's not like I love Carson, love him. But he's loaded, and I've earned it after dealing with my messed up family for years. Especially Ian. God, what a martyr. He's like a side character in a movie no one wants to finish." I didn't have to look at her to feel the panic radiating off her in waves. The video held on that last line for a few seconds, long enough to land. Then a fade to black. The music returned, soft again, but with a new undertone. A single quote appeared on screen, white text against black. Sometimes, the quiet ones are the ones who remember everything. And then, the slideshow ended. The lights came back up. Someone cleared their throat. Glasses clinked awkwardly. There were murmurs now. Lots of them. I heard Carson mutter, "What was that?" loud enough for several tables to catch it. My dad stood up sharply, knocking his chair over. "What was that?" he echoed, staring straight at me. I didn't answer. Just took a slow sip of water. Elise shot to her feet. Her voice was high, fake cheerful, cracking. "Okay. Haha, wow. That was, clearly not the right file. Little prank from Ian, I guess. Let's all just forget that." But she was cut off by my cousin, who turned to her with a disgusted face. "Wait, was that real? You actually said that about Carson?" About Ian? That's when the unraveling began. Voices started overlapping. Someone shouted from another table, "Why would you let that play during the wedding toast?" My aunt was whispering furiously to my mom. My mom kept shaking her head like she'd just woken up from a dream she didn't understand. Carson stood and walked away from the table, phone in hand. Elise called after him, her voice shrill. And I just sat there, still at the kids' table, still the invisible brother, still the family ghost. But this time, everyone saw me. The projector was off. The illusion was broken, and they had no idea what was coming next. Elise stumbled after Carson, heels clicking too loud on the wooden floor, voice climbing into a pitch I hadn't heard since we were teenagers. "Carson, wait, just wait. It was a joke. That video was from years ago. You know I didn't mean it like that." Her voice cracked near the end, desperation bleeding through. But he didn't turn around. He pushed open the side door and vanished into the courtyard beyond, his best man jogging after him. The door swung shut with a dull thud. Inside, the silence cracked open like a fault line. My mom stood stiffly, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room like she could somehow undo what had just happened through sheer force of will. My dad sat back down heavily, jaw tight, face pale. The man who always had something to say, some insult, some sarcastic remark, suddenly looked like he couldn't even form a sentence. I noticed his hand was shaking slightly as he lifted his wine glass. My uncle, Uncle Grant, the one who'd laughed earlier when I was seated at the kids' table, leaned across to my dad and whispered something. I didn't hear it, but whatever it was, it made my dad's eyes narrow and his lips purse hard enough to turn white. I could almost see the gears turning. Anger, confusion, calculation. The other guests were stirring now, murmuring like a wave building offshore. I could hear snippets. Was that supposed to be funny? Did Elise really say all that? Who made that video? I thought Ian was the editor. And then, wait, was that his revenge? That last one spread like a match dropped in dry grass. My cousin Jenna, Elise's age, from my mom's side, who always treated me decently, slid into the empty seat beside me. "You edited that, didn't you?" she said quietly. No accusation in her voice. Just curiosity. Maybe a hint of awe. I didn't answer. I just gave a small smile and kept sipping my water. I mean, she looked toward the head table, where Elise was now huddled between two bridesmaids, her hands flying in frantic gestures. "I can't exactly blame you." From the center of the room, the DJ cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, thank you, everyone, for that, emotional tribute. Let's, keep the party going. Up next, we've got the father-daughter dance." No. The word cut through the air like a whip. My dad stood again, louder this time. "No. Turn it off." His voice wobbled, not with weakness, but something closer to rage barely held in check. "There's not going to be a dance. There's not going to be any more videos." The DJ froze, hand hovering over the controls. A moment later, Elise rushed back into the room, face blotchy, mascara smudged. "Where's Carson?" she hissed, voice trembling with panic. "Has anyone seen him?" A bridesmaid leaned in and whispered something in her ear. Elise's face went pale. She turned to my mom. "Mom, he's leaving. He says he needs air, but he took his keys." My mom blinked, still stunned. Maybe he's going to the car to cool down." "Don't worry, sweetie. Just breathe." My dad wasn't listening. He was staring at me now. Full on. That simmering kind of glare that says, "You crossed a line." His hands were clenched into fists at his side. "You think that was funny?" he said. "You think you're clever, making a spectacle out of your sister's wedding?" That was when I finally stood up. And it felt different this time. I wasn't the awkward kid fumbling for his place at the table. I wasn't the quiet brother sitting in someone else's shadow. I was just standing. Calm. Steady. "I didn't make a spectacle," I said evenly. "I just played the truth." "You humiliated your family," he growled. I tilted my head. "No. You humiliated yourselves." I just hit play. The room had gone still again. People watching. Not sure if they were seeing a meltdown or a movie scene. Even the waitstaff had paused in the background, frozen mid-step with trays of sparkling wine. My dad took a step toward me. "You've always been like this. Bitter. Petty. Blaming us for your own disappointment." I cut in. "Because that's what I've always been to you, right? A disappointment." His mouth worked, but no sound came out. I looked around. You all saw it. For the first time, you really saw it. Not the polished version. Not the fake smiles or the holiday cards. Just the way things really were. Elise's voice cracked from behind. "You're ruining everything, Ian." I turned slowly. She was standing there, bouquet crushed in her hand, dress slightly wrinkled from her hasty dash outside. Her eyes were glossy, her cheeks blotchy with tears. And for once, she didn't look golden. She looked real, human, panicked, exposed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I just said, "You did that on your own." She blinked rapidly. "I trusted you." "No," I said. "You used me. You wanted a slideshow. You just didn't think I'd have anything worth showing." Her face crumpled slightly, and right as I was about to turn away, the side door opened again. Carson stepped back into the room. His tie was loosened, his face unreadable. He didn't walk to Elise. He didn't smile. He just stood in the doorway, eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. And then, with a flat voice that made the room fall silent again, he said, "Ian, can we talk?" Elise gasped. "Carson, why would you want to talk to him?" But he didn't answer her. He was still looking at me, and something in his expression told me this night wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I hesitated, not out of fear or confusion, but because part of me still couldn't believe it was happening. Carson, the golden boy, the safe choice, the man my parents doted on like some second son, was standing there asking to talk to me. Not Elise. Not my father. Me. The ghost. The side character. The one who was supposed to sit quietly at the kids' table and stay invisible. I glanced around. My mother looked confused. My father looked furious. Elise looked betrayed. And for a moment, I just stood there, letting it all settle. The weight of what I'd done, the reality of what was unraveling around them. Then I nodded once, slowly, and walked toward the side door. We stepped outside into the cool evening air. The sky was a dusky purple, the sun dipping low behind the vineyard hills. Carson leaned against the railing of the porch, running a hand through his hair. He didn't say anything at first, just stared out over the grapevines like they held the answers. Then, finally, he sighed. "So that was real?" he asked. "That clip of Elise?" I nodded. Completely unedited. The date stamps on the bottom if you look close enough. Her words, not mine. He didn't react right away. Then he let out a dry laugh, short and bitter. "You know, I always had this feeling. That she was with me for reasons. But I told myself I was being paranoid. That maybe I wasn't funny enough or deep enough or whatever, but that she loved me." He looked at me, and for the first time, his expression wasn't smug or polite. It was just tired. "You blew up her whole wedding." "I didn't blow up anything," I replied. "I told the truth. She lit the fuse a long time ago." He nodded slowly, then looked back toward the reception hall. "She's going to hate you for the rest of her life." "She already did," I said quietly. She just smiled while doing it. We stood there for another moment before Carson pushed off the railing and walked toward the parking lot. "I'm not going back in there," he muttered. "Not for the dance. Not for the cake. I'm not marrying someone who talks about me like that." "Carson," I called out as he reached his car. "If it makes you feel any better, I didn't plan to play that clip. Not originally. But when I saw what table they put me at, and what my dad said when I got there, I shook my head. I realized they weren't going to change. None of them. Not her. Not him. Not anyone. So I stopped protecting them." He stared at me, then nodded once. "Good. Someone needed to." And then he got in his car and drove off. I stood in the gravel drive for a while, letting the hum of crickets and distant music wash over me. I could almost pretend it was peaceful, if not for the faint sound of yelling filtering out from inside. When I finally walked back into the reception hall, the room had fractured completely. Elise was crying, loud and uncontrolled, surrounded by bridesmaids who didn't know whether to comfort her or back away. My father was yelling at the AV guy, demanding to know how the video got cued. The DJ looked panicked. My mother was sitting at a table with her hands folded tightly in her lap, pale and unmoving, as if trying to will herself invisible. As I stepped inside, the yelling paused for a second. Heads turned. My dad turned red. "You think this is funny?" he barked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You think destroying your sister's wedding makes you a man? A hero?" "No," I said, my voice calm. "It just makes me free." He took a step toward me, but someone caught his arm. "Uncle Grant." "Don't," Grant muttered. "Don't do it. Not here. Not now." "I'm his father," my dad snapped. "You think I'm going to let him embarrass this family?" and walk out smiling. "You already embarrassed yourselves," someone said. It took a second to realize the voice had come from Jenna, my cousin. She stood up from her table and faced the room. We've all seen it for years. The favoritism. The way you treat Ian like a placeholder. It's not new. You just finally got caught on camera. Others started murmuring agreement. One by one, I noticed it. Guests shifting, frowning, looking at Elise and my parents with new eyes. The illusion of the perfect family shattered, and the cracks were spreading. I think we should go, someone muttered behind me. But I didn't move. I walked past my dad and stopped near the head table, where the untouched wedding cake still stood. 3 tiers of fondant perfection, now meaningless. Elise turned to me, mascara streaking down her cheeks, bouquet crushed in her grip. I trusted you, she whispered. No, Elise, I said, you used me. You never cared what I thought. You just assumed I'd show up and do whatever you needed. Just like always. She blinked rapidly. It was just a stupid joke at a party. It wasn't a joke to me. I cut in. None of it ever was. You all treated me like I didn't matter for years. I kept quiet. I stayed out of the way, and I let it happen. But this? Today? Sitting me at the kids' table, whispering insults in front of 100 people. What did you expect? My mom finally spoke, her voice barely audible. You should have come to us. Told us how you felt. I turned to her. I did. Dozens of times. You just didn't hear me. Or maybe you just didn't care. She didn't answer. The music had stopped entirely now. The dance floor was empty. The celebration was over, even if no one had officially said it. I think we're done here, I said, then turned and walked to the back of the hall where my jacket hung on the chair. Ian, my father said, and something about the way he said my name made me pause. But when I turned, he just stared at me, face hard, mouth drawn. You'll regret this, he said. You'll regret pushing your family away. I smiled. I didn't push you away. You were never holding on. And with that, I walked out. It took 2 hours to get back to the little rental cabin I'd booked nearby. I ignored the texts flooding in, some furious, some apologetic, some unreadable in all caps. Elise called twice. Carson didn't call at all. I poured a glass of water, sat on the porch, and just breathed. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for approval. I wasn't hoping they'd notice me, or hoping they wouldn't. I had no more illusions to protect, no fake smiles to paste on my face for the sake of keeping peace in a war zone. I didn't know what would come next. Maybe they'd cut me off. Maybe Elise would start a smear campaign. Maybe they'd pretend it never happened. But whatever it was, I didn't care. Because now they knew. They all knew. And I wasn't invisible anymore. Not to them. And finally, not to myself. My name's Darren, I'm 34, and I haven't been part of the family in a long time, at least not in the way they define it. To them, I'm the quiet one. The background guy. Not flashy, not loud, not sentimental. Just present. Always present. The one who helps out when needed but never makes a fuss. The one who writes the checks when there's an emergency, fixes the messes no one talks about, and somehow still ends up the one they ignore at birthdays and weddings. My mom says I'm too private. My brother calls me boring. My dad, he used to call me practical, but that tone has changed over the years. Now he just says I don't have the spark. And somewhere along the way, they convinced themselves I was just another piece in their picture-perfect family portrait. Necessary, maybe, but never central. Not like my brother, Kevin. Kevin is 2 years younger than me and has been the golden child since he was in diapers. I'm not even bitter about it anymore. It just is what it is. He was the one my mom bragged about at book club. The one my dad trained to take over the business. Even though I was the one working behind the scenes since college, managing the accounts, the legal side, the licensing, everything. Kevin couldn't read a quarterly report if it was printed in cartoon font, but he knew how to charm a room, and to my family, that was what mattered. He was the face. I was the guy behind the curtain, making sure the lights stayed on. I never argued. Not once. Not when Dad gave Kevin a company car I'd leased under my name. Not when Mom told neighbors that Kevin had really turned things around at the business after I'd quietly fixed a massive IRS issue 2 years ago. Not even when Kevin started calling himself CEO, despite the fact that the business has legally been mine since Dad signed it over, thinking it was just for taxes. I smiled. I nodded. I made sure payroll didn't bounce and that everyone else could keep pretending. It wasn't about ego. Honestly, I didn't care about the title or the credit. I just didn't want to see the whole thing fall apart. Dad built the company from nothing. And even if he never acknowledged my role, I wasn't going to let it collapse. It was supposed to be temporary, a legal technicality after Dad's back surgery when we had to shift things around for liability reasons. He handed over ownership to me without really looking at the paperwork. I figured we'd revisit it later. But later never came. Instead, Dad started acting like he was back in charge, ignoring every update I sent him. Kevin stopped showing up entirely, except when he needed to schmooze with a client or impress a girlfriend. And my mom, she just kept reminding me that Kevin is the future of this family. Every dinner, every phone call, as if I was the past, as if I hadn't kept them all afloat, including the mortgage on the very house we all gathered in last week for Dad's 60th birthday. That house. God, that house. It used to be my childhood home, but my parents sold it 10 years ago when things got tight. Then 2 years later, after Kevin blew through the money they made from the sale and begged for help, I bought it back. Quietly, under my LLC. Let them move in. Let them believe some miracle investor had given them a sweetheart deal. They never asked questions, just moved in like it was owed to them. Mom even had the nerve to call it our house in front of her friends last Christmas, while I was the one shoveling the snow outside. So when Dad's big birthday bash rolled around, I already had a knot in my stomach. Not because I didn't want to celebrate him, but because I knew exactly how the night was going to go. I knew the speech would come. I just didn't know how far he'd take it. The house was full of extended family and friends I hadn't seen in years. Kevin stood at the center of it all, holding court like he always did, laughing too loudly, telling stories that somehow made him the hero every time. My mom flitted from guest to guest, bragging about the imported food, the wine, the caterers, all of which I'd paid for through my company. Dad sat in the living room like a king on a throne, wearing a new watch I'd sent anonymously a month before. He never even asked who it was from. Probably assumed it was Kevin. I kept mostly to the edge of the room. Played the role. The quiet son. The background guy. I didn't even get introduced to half the guests. One woman asked me if I was Kevin's assistant. I smiled and said something like that. Then came the toast. It started normal enough. A few jokes, some warm memories. People clapped and laughed. Kevin stood beside him, arms slung over his shoulder, basking in the attention like it was his birthday. Then Dad raised his glass a little higher, and the room got quiet. Everything you see here, he said, voice loud and clear, exists because of me. The house, the business, the cars, this family. There were polite nods, claps. Then he added, and when I'm gone, it all goes to Kevin. He's earned it. The silence after that was louder than anything. Kevin grinned. Mom gave a little smirk. And I just sat there, still, like a statue carved from disbelief. Not anger, just an ache. Familiar, dull, and now sharpened to a point. I looked at my dad, really looked at him, and I realized he wasn't trying to be cruel. He just genuinely believed it. In his mind, none of this could exist without him, not even the things I'd built in his name. In his eyes, I was just the help. That was the moment it all crystallized for me. All the little slights, the ignored emails, the unchecked receipts, the way Kevin had parked his company car diagonally on the lawn like he owned the place. They didn't just take me for granted, they erased me. They'd rewritten the story entirely, cast me as an extra in my own life. But I didn't react. Not then. I smiled. I lifted my glass. And I toasted with the rest of them. Because the moment wasn't about arguing. It was about revealing. So after the cake had been cut and the guests started filing out, I walked upstairs to the guest room where I'd been staying for the weekend. I grabbed the black folder I'd tucked into my bag the night before, a simple leather case with neatly tabbed documents. Deeds, registrations, ownership records, signatures. I brought it downstairs, and without a word, I set it gently on the dining table, right beside the half-empty champagne flutes and the forgotten birthday cards. The label on the folder was simple, updated ownership records. Then I walked out the front door without saying a word. And I waited. I didn't go far. Just around the corner, actually. There's a quiet park bench at the end of the cul-de-sac, half hidden by an overgrown hedge, where I used to sit with my headphones after school. I hadn't been there in years, but I remembered every crack in the pavement. I sat down, let the cool night air settle over me, and pulled out my phone. I wasn't watching them, exactly, but I was waiting. I knew what I'd left behind. I knew the weight of that folder and the silence it would detonate the moment someone opened it. 15 minutes later, the text came. From Kevin. What is this? Dad's freaking out. I didn't reply. I just watched the typing dots come and go. Then came another one. Tell me this is a joke. Then the call. I let it ring out. Then another one from Mom. I let that one ring too. The thing is, they never asked. That's what always stuck with me. Not once, in all these years, did they ever stop and ask how the bills got paid, or who signed the checks, or why the mortgage company had a different mailing address. They didn't want to know. They just liked the illusion. And I'd kept it intact for longer than I should have. I stayed out there until the porch lights flicked off one by one. Until the house, my house, quieted down. By the time I came back in, the folder was gone from the table. Dad was in the kitchen, leaning over the counter with both hands pressed flat like he needed it to hold him up. He didn't look at me when I walked in. Neither did Mom, who was sitting at the island clutching a cup of untouched tea like it was the only thing tethering her to the floor. Kevin, though? Kevin came storming out of the hallway, folder in hand, papers spilling from the sides like it had already been rifled through by frantic fingers. You think this is funny? He said, voice sharp. I didn't answer. Just looked at him. You can't do this, he snapped, waving the folder like a weapon. This is ours. This house, this business, everything. You don't get to just rewrite history. I walked past him and poured myself a glass of water. Took my time. I didn't rewrite anything, I said. I just filed it properly. He opened his mouth to speak, but Dad cut in from the kitchen, voice low, heavy. Is it true? I turned to face him. His hands were still braced on the counter. His eyes hadn't moved. Yes, I said. The house. The business. The cars. Everything Kevin's been showing off like a prize. They're mine. Registered. Owned. Maintained. By me. Mom finally spoke. But why? I blinked at her. Why? I echoed. Because no one else could. When the IRS came knocking, when the accounts were frozen, when Kevin maxed out 3 company credit cards in a month, who fixed it? Who paid off the vendors so you could keep hosting brunches like nothing happened? Who signed the refinancing papers on this place when your credit score didn't qualify you for a loan? Mom's lip trembled, but I wasn't angry. I was done being angry. I was just exhausted. You didn't even ask, I said quietly. You just assumed I'd keep showing up. Keep cleaning up. Keep disappearing into the background. Dad finally looked at me. Really looked. Why didn't you tell us? That made me laugh. Not loudly. Just one of those bitter little exhales that happens when something sad finally becomes funny. Tell you? I said. The last time I tried to explain something, Kevin interrupted me to take credit for the last quarter's numbers, the ones I personally reconciled. You gave him a bottle of scotch. You told me to take notes. Kevin turned red. That's not fair. No, I said. It's not. He sputtered. You think this makes you better than us? You think this folder makes you the boss? I took a step closer. Calm. Measured. No, I said. It just makes me the owner. And in that silence, for the first time in my entire life, I watched my father blink like he was seeing me for the first time. Kevin dropped the folder onto the floor and stormed off. Mom called after him, but her voice cracked halfway through. Dad sat down at the kitchen table like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. And I walked over to the fireplace, picked up the old family photo Mom loved to keep there, the one from Kevin's college graduation. I wasn't in it. I'd been the one taking the picture. I set it face down on the mantle. Then I turned to my parents and said quietly, "There's one more thing I wanted to let you know." I paused, let the weight of the moment sit. But before I could speak, the door behind me burst open. And there he was. Kevin. Kevin's face was flushed, his hair disheveled like he'd yanked at it all the way down the hallway. He was holding his laptop open, the screen still glowing. He didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway, chest heaving, eyes locked on me like I'd just pulled the rug out from under his whole life. And maybe, in a way, I had. But I wasn't ready for what he said next. You revoked my access, he breathed. To everything. I didn't respond. Just waited. The CRM system. The payroll dashboard. The company email. He looked down at the laptop and back at me. It's all gone. My login doesn't work. My phone's been blowing up. I've got 15 employees asking why their accounts are frozen. He stepped forward, voice rising. What did you do, Darren? I set my glass down on the counter, the sound of it tapping the granite louder than anything else in the room. I took back what was mine, I said. You can't just lock me out of my job. It's not your job, I said. It never was. He looked stunned for a moment, like he'd just been punched in the stomach. You're joking, right? This is some kind of punishment. No, I said. This is me correcting a mistake. You were the mistake, he spat. You were never supposed to be part of this. You were always just the background guy. Dad trained me. This company was always going to be mine. You think you can just swoop in and take it because you paid a few bills? My father flinched. A few bills. I repeated, slowly. Kevin, you were this close to being sued for breach of contract. Twice. You didn't even know we had to carry liability insurance until I put you on a call with the lawyer. You've been playing CEO on social media while I've been running the company from behind the scenes. If anything, I gave you too much access. He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. And let me be very clear, I didn't revoke anything tonight. Your access was set to expire 2 weeks ago when you stopped showing up to Monday calls and started charging spa weekends to the business account. He looked to Dad for backup. Tell him, Kevin said. Tell him this is insane. But Dad didn't say a word. Not yet. He just sat there, eyes flicking between us like he was watching a tennis match he didn't buy tickets for. I'm not shutting down the business. I added, more to Dad than to Kevin. I'm just shutting you out. Permanently. Over what? Kevin shouted. Because I got a little recognition for once. Recognition? I repeated. Kevin, you gave a speech at last quarter's meeting thanking yourself for increased profits that came directly from a software automation tool I spent 3 months building. You don't even know the name of half our vendors. You used to forward contract requests to Mom to print for you because you couldn't figure out how to sign a PDF. That's not true. I snapped. Go check your sent folder. Kevin was breathing hard, fists clenched, jaw tight. He looked at me like he didn't even recognize the person standing in front of him. But that's because he didn't. None of them did. They didn't know I'd stayed up for weeks fixing a malware breach that Kevin had caused by downloading pirated music on the company laptop. They didn't know I'd paid for the roof after the storm last year, or that the reason the accountant never called back was because I was the accountant. They didn't know anything, because I never told them. Because I thought keeping the peace was more important than being seen. And maybe, for a while it was. But not anymore. Mom finally spoke again, her voice shaking. Sweetheart, maybe we misunderstood. No, I said. You didn't misunderstand. You just didn't care to know. You all liked having a scapegoat when things went wrong, and a shadow when things went right. Dad stood up then. Slowly. Not angrily. Just like he was realizing how deep the ground had shifted under his feet. So what now, he asked. I met his eyes. Now? You live in a house I own. You drive a car registered under my LLC. The business you keep bragging about? It's mine. And if you want to keep pretending that Kevin earned any of this, I suggest you take a good look at those documents I left on the table. He looked down, jaw tight. I never meant to insult you, Darren. I just thought Kevin would carry the torch. I nodded. He can't carry a torch if he doesn't know where the matches are. The room was dead quiet. Until Kevin's voice cut through again, lower this time. More desperate. You can't just erase me. I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilt or resentment or even anger. I just felt done. I didn't erase you, Kevin, I said quietly. You did that all on your own. And then Dad's phone lit up on the counter. A new email notification. From the legal team. Subject line, formal transfer of executive authority, confirmation attached. He reached for it. Opened it. Read it. And his eyes widened. He looked up at me, mouth half open. Darren, this isn't just the company. I nodded. No. It's everything. And that's when the front door suddenly swung open again. I turned. It was Uncle Richard, with an envelope in his hand. Uncle Richard wasn't the dramatic type. He was my dad's older brother, retired, calm, the kind of guy who brought his own folding chair to barbecues and read contracts like they were bedtime stories. I hadn't seen him all night, and I wasn't expecting to see him now, let alone walk through the front door uninvited with a manila envelope clutched in one hand and a grim look on his face. He looked around the room slowly, at Kevin still clutching his laptop, at my dad sitting pale and stiff behind the kitchen island, at me standing there like I'd just set off a bomb. He walked over without a word, laid the envelope flat on the counter, and said, I thought I'd let you know in person before the rest of the board finds out in the morning. Dad blinked. The board? Uncle Richard nodded. You remember the quarterly review we postponed? I just got off the phone with the advisory committee. What are you talking about? Kevin asked, voice cracking. Uncle Richard turned to me, then gave me a slow, measured nod, a gesture I hadn't seen from anyone in this family in a long time. Not respect. Not pity. Just recognition. Darren submitted the full audit you asked me to keep confidential, he said to Dad. I didn't want to believe it at first. I really didn't. But it checks out. Every transfer, every invoice, every asset shift. He didn't hide a thing. He tapped the envelope. This is a copy of what's going out to the rest of the shareholders tomorrow. My dad's hand hovered over the envelope like it burned to the touch. I didn't ask for an audit. No, I said. But the bylaws you wrote in 1993 let any majority shareholder request one if they feel there's been financial misrepresentation. Which, as of last month, I am. Dad turned to Richard in disbelief. You let him do this? Richard shook his head. No, you did. You signed over 71% of company equity to Darren 5 years ago when he refinanced your buyout plan. You just didn't bother reading the clauses. You assumed he was cleaning up your books out of loyalty. I didn't flinch. And I was. But loyalty doesn't mean silence forever. Kevin looked like he'd been punched in the chest. You're lying. No, Richard said, voice flat. He's not. Silence. My mom looked between us all, eyes filling with tears, not from understanding, but from the sudden, painful realization that the world she'd constructed around her golden boy and her untouchable husband was collapsing from the inside out. You were always so quiet, she whispered, like it was an accusation. I turned to her. Maybe if someone had listened when I wasn't. She looked away. Dad finally tore open the envelope, scanned the papers inside. I watched the color drain from his face as he reached page after page. Tax filings, asset declarations, legal filings, even the board memo Richard had already prepared. Every page was a brick in the wall I'd spent years building in silence, stone by stone, while they all thought I was just helping out. Kevin leaned against the wall like he might slide down it. You're ruining everything. No, I said. I'm cleaning it up. You can't just take everything from us. I didn't take anything. You handed it to me, because none of you paid attention. You just assumed I was happy being invisible. And maybe I was. But invisible doesn't mean incompetent. Kevin stepped forward, desperate now. Okay. Look, I messed up. I'll fix it, okay? You want me out of the company? Fine. I'll leave. Just don't take the house. Don't leave Mom and Dad with nothing. I studied him. There it was. The switch. The plea. The fear. Do you know how many years I stayed silent because of that? I said quietly. Because I didn't want to leave them with nothing? I looked at my father. You could have sat me down at any point. Asked me what I was doing. What I needed. What I wanted. He didn't respond. He just looked small. Not angry. Not proud. Just small. You said this all exists because of you, I said. But if that were true, it'd be gone by now. Uncle Richard cleared his throat. The board's reviewing a proposal Darren submitted. He's restructuring everything, dissolving old debts, shifting assets. He's even offering early retirement packages to long-term staff. Dad's eyes shot up. You're firing my people? No, I said. I'm giving them a choice. Stay and get paid better, or leave with full pension and a bonus. Unlike Kevin, I don't believe in milking loyalty dry. Richard added, you should be thankful, really. If Darren hadn't stepped in when he did, the company would have collapsed 2 years ago. You'd be in bankruptcy court, and Kevin would be live streaming your foreclosure. That finally hit home. Mom gasped softly. Kevin sank into a chair. I'm not evicting anyone, I said. The house stays in the family, technically. You can live here for as long as you want. Rent-free. But it's not yours. It never was. And the business? Dad asked quietly. I'll keep running it, I said. Properly. Legally. Profitably. But it won't be under the family name anymore. That name doesn't mean what it used to. I walked to the mantel and picked up the family photo I'd flipped earlier. Turned it back over. Looked at it for a long moment. I used to think I had to earn a place in this picture, I said. But I realized something. I was always in the frame. You just cropped me out. Dad swallowed hard. Kevin didn't look up. Mom started to cry. And I felt nothing but peace. Not smugness. Not victory. Just relief. Like I'd finally dropped the weight I'd been carrying since I was a teenager. The weight of silence. Of being useful but never valued. Trusted but never respected. I turned to Uncle Richard. Thank you for backing me. He smiled slightly. You didn't need my backing, Darren. You just needed to stop hiding. I nodded. Then I walked toward the front door, grabbing my overnight bag on the way. Kevin stood suddenly. Where are you going? Home, I said. To my other house. You're leaving? After all this? I didn't do this to stay. I did this to fix it. He opened his mouth again, but I raised a hand. One more thing, I said. The new HR policies go into effect Monday. You're no longer allowed to charge personal expenses to the business. And I've reassigned your title. To what? He asked bitterly. I looked him in the eye. To unemployed. His mouth dropped open. I turned, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. The night was cool, quiet. For the first time in years, I wasn't a shadow walking behind someone else's spotlight. I was just me. Not the disappointment. Not the wallet. Not the invisible one. Just Darren. And I was finally free.